Hello and welcome to ATARC's Artificial Intelligence and Data Analytics in the Federal Government Virtual Summit. For those who do not know, my name is Kirsten Patton, the Program Manager here at ATARC. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. Thank you to our partners over at Cloudera and Dinodo for helping us create today's summit. And additionally, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. We hope that you enjoy this session, and we would also like to remind you that after each panel, there will be time for a Q&A, so please place all of your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen during the panels. We'll be asking our speakers those questions throughout. I also want to remind you that as the poll questions come up, please answer them in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credit for attending today's session. Up first, I would like to introduce our visionary keynote, Chief in the Business Intelligence Services over at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, Brian Lane. Brian, over to you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. For some reason, oh, here we go. Video is coming on. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to Kirsten and Alyssa and the rest of the ATARC team for putting this together. I'm very honored to be here and to be your visionary keynote for the day. I'm going to share my screen in just a second, and we'll get started with the presentation. I'm in a bit of an interesting situation as I'm 2.5 weeks on the job in my new role at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And so I decided to take on a topic today that is common across all organizations. In my previous role, I helped stand up the AI Center of Excellence at GSA. And I spent nearly 20 months supporting the Department of Defense Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. In this role, now I'm helping the FDIC incorporate AI adoption into their broad range of business intelligence services that not only supports the business of the FDIC, but also the internal organization. So I'm going to talk today about leading AI teams because that's common across all of those threads that I've worked over the last 3 years. And I'm going to start with something that is a little bit of a fun topic. I'm going to talk about video games really quickly. And the reason I'm going to talk about video games is because, for one, it's a foundational part of my childhood. These are the games that I grew up playing. Command and Conquer, Civilization, Age of Empires, and they all have something in common. And that thing that they have in common is making decisions on how to apply your resources and how to interact and operate within a system to optimize your results. And over the last 3 years, I've worked a number of different AI projects related to acquisition modernization, policy discovery and analytics and natural language processing, intelligent automation for finance, for human capital management, for strategic communications, large-scale computer vision tasks. And all of these systems have something in common, which is we as managers and leaders are making decisions to kind of optimize and tune how our teams operate within these systems, ultimately towards achieving whatever your performance goals are, very much like this video games. And so in the process of leading AI teams, I started to think about policy as code, or from a intelligent systems perspective. The idea that we can treat policy as configuration files and how we program our organizations to perform. And over time, we can understand the tweaks and changes and roles and responsibilities and how that affects organizational performance. And I think that that's kind of a big picture transformational idea that we can incorporate in the government and leverage some AI related capabilities, whether it's natural language processing or automation, or even in the broadest sense, using things like rules-based systems, and logical systems as well. So I get really excited about this because it's like I'm seeing my childhood come to life, where we now have the technology and the compute and the resources to in a way program our organizations the same way we program these virtual worlds growing up, virtual worlds that I played growing up. Here's some examples of this actually happening in other realms, right? So I pulled some configuration files for infrastructure as code and for virtualized networking, for Terraform builds and some of these other things. And we see very complicated systems being built up through using infrastructure as code or configuration files. And one of the big ideas that I'm hoping to start to do more work in is to get closer towards that transformation to where we start thinking about policy as code and data-driven acquisition and an AI-powered government and an AI-powered partnership with the industrial base as well. But I fully recognize, nobody falls in on a brand new team to build from the ground up. Many times we fall in on teams and processes that already exist, and those processes may be well established over time. They may be fairly new, or you may be working in a startup environment, but in some way or another, it requires an amount of leadership in order to drive towards these transformational ideas. And so that's what I want to talk about today. When I think about leadership for AI teams, really I think about evolution and innovation. I'm going to give one of my favorite anecdotes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Red Queen effect. So the Red Queen effect is an evolutionary biology theory, and it's basically a theory about evolution and competition in natural systems and natural environment. And basically what it says is, those organisms that are more fit to quickly adapt faster than their environment are more likely to thrive. And the Red Queen effect as a theory and as a principle was taken from the Lewis Carroll novel Through the Looking Glass. And you can see the Red Queen here is holding Alice, and she's saying, in this crazy world, you've got to run twice as fast to get where you're going. Otherwise, you're basically running in place. And that's a feeling that a number of organizations feel, especially in the IT space, while we're trying to make big changes without disrupting service to our customers and our users. And we have to think about this idea of how do we evolve while also still keeping the lights on without disrupting service and things like that. There's a few principles about evolution that are kind of implicit in this idea of the Red Queen effect. And those evolutionary traits are, the first one, it's necessary, right? In competitive environments and natural systems, you have to evolve to thrive. In business and as a customer service provider, you have to evolve to serve your customers, because the technology changes, the customers change, the environment changes, the types of services you provide might change. And so this idea of evolving over time is propped up by this principle that it's, for one, it's necessary. For two, it's constant, right? Evolution doesn't happen, one time a year and then you move on to the next task. Evolution involves being a little bit future looking, calculating risk, making decisions on how to steer your team and organization into something new in a way that is beneficial for the organization. And that is it's a habitual activity. It's a daily activity. And then finally, the Red Queen effect also implies that evolution is incremental. We think about things in terms of crawl, walk, run, or these phased approaches, but really, if you break down the activity of crawling into very, very tiny movements, you see you get these incremental improvements over time because you're habitually trying to improve. And then when you zoom way out and look at the timeline, it looks like a stepwise improvement where you crawl, walk, run, but actually there are a lot of tiny improvements that happen in between those phases. And so when I think about organizational evolution and AI adoption, I think these are the three principles that kind of prop up driving towards leveraging AI in your organization. And when it comes to when it comes to things like balancing between keeping the lights on and making steps towards being a modern AI powered organization, I think about things in terms of 80-15-5. This is a rule of thumb principle, not a hard and fast principle, but kind of rule of thumb of where you spend your effort. And I like to think about teams in terms of spending 80% on operations, serving your customer, keeping the lights on, existing within the current technology stack and the team that you have today. I think about 15% of that effort being applied towards modernization, improving the things that you're doing today. And then I think about 5% effort being applied towards overall innovation or getting towards those big transformational changes or incorporating new technology or new processes or reshaping and changing the skill sets of your team. Those are small tweaks that happen because you don't want to be disruptive to the service that you're providing. So this is kind of the mental model that I fit. Where do you apply work effort? But here's what I've observed at organizations across the board. They kind of fit into three classes. The first class, I'm going to go ahead and call that the Red Queen. And the first class is, you have this red ring of operations happening. And then if you notice, there's kind of this overlapping red circle. And what that is it's maintenance disguised as modernization. It's paying, it's your regular software upgrades. It's bringing in one or two new tools into the environment, where really it's just it's a maintenance function that's disguised as modernization. In these kinds of organizations, there's very little innovation activity happening, if any at all. If you look in the center here, we have this idea of an advancing organization. And these are, honestly, many organizations that I've worked with kind of fit into the advancing bucket where, they have their operations clearly lined out. They have modernization efforts that maybe are halfway inside and halfway outside of kind of the operational boundary. Maybe there's a little disconnect there. Maybe there's some resistance to change, but at least they're taking effort towards modernization in one way or another. And then there are typically innovation activities that are disconnected from the operation. So, a CTO office or like these kind of one-off innovation activities. And then, and then the third is the ideal state where your modernization, and your innovation are baked into your daily process for your operations as a whole. That's kind of how I view organizations. And then I'm going to talk really quickly about values that are important to me for leading teams. And then I will close out. So when it comes to leading these high-performing teams and kind of the organizational constructs, once you know where your organization is, these are principles that I consider to be very important, right? And the first one is to create the shared why. Why are we trying to make this change? Why are we trying to incorporate artificial intelligence and AI adoption? And in a lot of ways, it's us as a team. We're fighting the Red Queen effect together. We're fighting the gravity that keeps you in operating in the same mode that you're operating today and the same mode that you were operating in yesterday. So we're constantly fighting that. There's tension there. We want to promote development and growth of our people, our processes, our organizations. And then we want to create an enabled and empowered team of practitioners, of AI practitioners, that have the ability to identify and spot and scout opportunities to leverage AI in the workplace. And the way we do this is by encouraging people to learn together and to deliver together. And one of the most common things I hear on my teams is, I've never done this before, and that's okay. Because we're smart people that are committed to the shared why of fighting that Red Queen effect together, and we'll learn and figure out what works, and we'll figure out how to improve delivery. And what that looks like in practice for me is, I have this first bullet up here: address tribalism amongst engineers. I know engineers are very opinionated. I know there's multiple ways to attack a problem, and in my opinion, if we're talking about how to attack the problem, that means that all the other, factors of creating a psychologically safe and open workplace where people can communicate and share ideas is already happening in place. If we're talking about the solution, we want to acknowledge things like unconscious biases. We want to have clear roles and responsibilities so everyone knows how they fit on the team. Make sure that we're giving everyone a voice. And really seek out diversity of thought and perspective and ideas, and really look at a problem from a 360-degree perspective, and then champion and mentor those people on your team and the excellent work that you're delivering. If you do all of these things, I really believe that you will enable a team that is continually learning, continually improving, and that will be baked into your system overall. I know I went a couple minutes over, but I'm going to stop there. I hope this was useful and helpful for everyone. And again, thank you to the ATARC team for making this opportunity available to me. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the panel with outstanding practitioners and leaders in the AI and data analytics space. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We certainly did enjoy that. Up next, we will be hearing from our Emerging Technology Talk, Paul Markson. Paul is the SVP Data Architecture and Chief Evangelist over at Dinodo. Paul, please take it away.
Okay, thank you there, Kirsten. And also, all right, let's see if I can share my screen now. Hopefully you can see my screen. Great. So thank you, Kirsten. Also, Brian, that was a great keynote, and that balance of keeping the lights on versus modernization versus innovation is very, very important. And I'll actually come back to some of that. I believe we coordinated our talks here, but I'll come back to some of what Brian was saying because it was very, very important. And also thank you to the audience for joining us today for this tech talk entitled Accelerated Migration to the Cloud Using Data Virtualization. Let me just make my mouse work. There we are. Now, Andy Warhol said that everybody would be famous for 15 minutes. So for the next 15 minutes, I'll introduce myself as the famous Paul Markson. As Kirsten said, I'm the Senior Vice President of Data Architectures and Chief Evangelist at Dinodo Technologies. And in this role, I talk to many organizations around the world, both in the private and the public sector, about their data strategy, their advanced analytics strategy, their data architectures, etc. And invariably, the cloud, migration to the cloud, management of that subsequent complex hybrid architecture That's always a feature of these discussions. Just a quick bit about Dinodo, just in case you aren't familiar with us. We are a leading data management and data integration company. We're recognized by industry analysts such as Gartner and Forrester. The company was founded in 1999. Now we've got offices in 18 countries around the world and marquee customers in all industry sectors. In the private sector, we're talking about financial services, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, biotech, healthcare, etc. Now, in the public sector, more important for today, we have government agents from around the world as customers at the federal, state, and local level. And here in the United States, some of our customers include the Department of Defense, the FAA, the Department of Energy, the Veterans Administration, the National Institutes of Health. So everybody knows about the benefits of moving to the cloud, the flexibility, the on-demand scalability to spin up systems or compute capacity, then quickly shut them down again when you don't need them. There's also what I call the leveraged innovation. I can't say that word today, leveraged innovation. Taking advantage of all the innovation work that's done by Amazon and Microsoft and Google, etc. And this is especially true in the area of advanced analytics, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Simply being on the cloud allows you to take advantage of the services that they offer around natural language processing, vision recognition, chatbots, etc. It's very easy to go to, say, Amazon and spin up a chatbot in just a few minutes. You don't have to worry about the infrastructure and all the software and libraries that are necessary for this chatbot. You can go there and take advantage of it. And that's why migration and modernization, moving to the cloud, tends to be a key feature when people talk about advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. Now, the journey to the cloud for most organizations is not a one and done event. It really is a journey. It's a series of stages that the organization goes through as they transition more and more systems for the cloud. And this diagram illustrates those various stages. Now then, in this tech talk, we're only going to concentrate on the transition or migration to the cloud and just touch a bit on the resultant hybrid architecture that's a consequence of this transition. But all organizations go through these various stages of their cloud journey, and government agencies are no different from this. Now, when systems are migrated to the cloud, there are a number of options ranging from a simple lift and shift, just take my database and move it to the cloud. For example, take my on-premise SQL Server database and move it as is to SQL Server running on Microsoft Azure. At the other end of the scale, we've got this refactor, re-architect. This is migrating away from, say, an on-premise Oracle data warehouse to Redshift or Snowflake running up on Amazon or Microsoft. And during this migration, you'll probably refactor the underlying data model to reflect the agency's needs for today. In all probability, that data model was probably defined many years ago, and it reflects the agency's needs at that time, and it's probably been modified and added to over the years. Now, there was a fourth option which didn't actually make this slide, and that's retire and replace. Only 7% of respondents selected that particular option. And that just shows that we're not very good at retiring old legacy systems. We just create new ones. We're just creating more complexity, more complex architectures that have to be managed and used to deliver data, to deliver information for that analytics. Now, as you can see from the figures there, that refactor and re-architect is the most popular, but it's also the most intrusive and most risky option. By intrusive, I mean it's got the biggest impact on the users of the actual system itself. So take that data warehouse example, that Oracle data warehouse that we were talking about. There'll be hundreds, probably even thousands of reports and dashboards and applications running off that data warehouse. So the impact of migrating that to the cloud to say Snowflake and modernizing the data model is going to be quite widespread. One of my colleagues once described this as like waking up in one morning to find that all of the cell phones in your family had been changed from iPhones to Android phones. Well, the other way around if you're an Android user. So the icons are in different places and they look different. The way that you navigate around the screens is different. Your photos didn't move across to your new phone. Some of your contacts are missing. Your 8-year-old son has just found out that his high scores and progress on his favorite game has been wiped out, and he's in tears. In fact, the only person who seems to be managing with all of this on the new phone is your 12-year-old daughter, who thinks that you're all crazy for not being able to work it out yourselves. That's what it's like for users when you make major changes to their systems. So how can you make this less painful for your users during a cloud migration? One very successful way is to hide these changes from the users behind an abstraction layer. The client tools access their data through this abstraction layer and not directly from the data sources. This isolates them from any subsequent changes. This abstraction layer, in this case, it's a data virtualization platform, is inserted between the clients, the dashboards, the reports, the applications, etc., and the legacy on-premise data warehouse. The data virtualization platform, now it's a data access layer, effectively exposes the data as is. It's a simple pass-through operation. The data looks the same to the clients. They're just getting it from a different source. They're getting it from this data access layer, the data virtualization platform, rather than the legacy data warehouse directly. The reports and dashboards and applications do have to change because they are getting the data from a different place. But the change is to get the data from the different source, i.e. the data virtualization platform, rather than the original data warehouse. Therefore, these changes are typically quite minimal. You can then create your target schema. In this case, it's in the Snowflake Cloud Data Warehouse, and expose that schema through the data virtualization platform. If the schema that you've created in that target data warehouse, Snowflake, we're saying, is different from the one in the legacy data warehouse, you can use the data virtualization platform to make it look like the old schema, effectively reverse engineer the changes that you've made. Then finally, you copy the data from the legacy data warehouse to the new target in bite-sized chunks. For each data set copied, you can actually test it on your target on Snowflake and make it live by simply reconfiguring the data access layer, this data virtualization platform, to get the data set from Snowflake rather than the legacy data warehouse. The reports, the dashboards, the applications are still getting the data from the data virtualization platform. But the fact that it now comes from Snowflake is totally transparent to them. They continue as normal. Now, if there's a problem when you go live, for example, performance is not good enough or the data has errors, etc., then you can simply revert back to the legacy data warehouse just by reconfiguring the data virtualization platform to get that particular data set from there again. This way you can mitigate the risk as you migrate to your modern data warehouse in the cloud. Once the data set's live, you simply rinse and repeat this with the next data set and so on. In this way, the data virtualization platform acts as this abstraction layer, this data access layer, isolating the users of the data from the changes in the physical data infrastructure. This abstraction layer gives the users the ability to pick and choose what tools they want to use. So you have this flexibility of a bring your own tool strategy. Now, I know IT teams, IT departments tend not to like that. They like to have everything controlled and locked down. But you should, as users, as the data scientists, as the data analysts, you should have the freedom to choose the tool that you want to use, whether it's Tableau or Power BI for building dashboards or reports, whether you want to use RStudio or Python or SageMaker up on AWS, or even plain old Excel. if you can connect the data virtualization platform to this data access layer, you can get the data you need, the data that you have permission to access. This also gives IT flexibility and freedom to modernize and optimize the data infrastructure without worrying about the debilitating impact on the data users. And this goes back to some of what Brian was saying about modernization. Once you have something like a data abstraction layer in place, decoupling the users from physically accessing the underlying data directly, it gives IT a lot more freedom on how they can actually modernize, innovate, etc. So if I want to migrate a SQL Server database up to Microsoft Azure Cloud, I can do that without affecting the users. I can add a new data source or a new technology or a new data format. I can do so and use the abstraction layer, the data virtualization platform, to expose this new data source or new technology to the users with their existing tools via standard protocols and formats. So the abstraction layer actually decouples the users from the impact of change, but it also frees up IT to be more innovative and accelerate their modernization programs, especially things like moving to the cloud and taking advantage of all this leveraged innovation. So I will just wrap up with a few slides about an example of a government agency. It's actually the US Army Logistics Data Analysis Center, LDAC, who've actually done this type of migration using data virtualization as this abstraction layer. The Army Logistics Data Analysis Center, they provide information analysis to purchasing program managers and also to the logistics arm of the United States Army. Now, this is obviously a critical function. They supply everything. They do the analysis and logistics to supply everything from tanks to toilet paper, from bullets to bandages. So obviously this is something you can't just stop saying, no, we're shutting this down, we're going to do modernization, we've got an 18-month program, sorry, you can't have any data. This is keeping things running with the lights on while you're doing modernization and you're enabling innovation at the same time. So this goes back to what Brian was talking about. So the challenge for the LDAC was that they wanted to reduce their Oracle footprint. They wanted to modernize their data warehouse. They wanted to move to a cloud data lake implementation. And also at the same time, they're actually consolidating the number of systems and the number of data centers they were running. And they decided that the approach they would take would be to use data virtualization as this abstraction data access layer, this semantic layer, and also provide a single source where the users could go and get the data. If the users can connect their tools to this data access layer, the semantic layer, they can get the data they need without wondering whether it comes from the legacy data warehouse, the new cloud data lake, or any of the other systems as they were going through their consolidation program. This is the architecture, whatever you want to call it, that they actually built. And you can see they built this abstraction layer, this semantic transformation layer, as they call it, using data virtualization, which allowed the users to come and get the data from that data layer without having to worry about whether it was in the cloud data lake, the data warehouses, or any other systems. It allowed them to modernize their systems. They consolidated more than 20 different systems down to 6, consolidated 2 data centers into 1 over an 18-month program while the lights were still on. Like I said, you can't just shut down your logistics for the United States Army. So just to wrap up, a few key takeaways. Cloud modernization is an important part of any advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning initiative. Moving to the cloud is not a simple thing. Many organizations move to the cloud and doesn't deliver the benefits that they would hope to get. Using data virtualization as this abstraction layer allows you to modernize your systems, take advantage of that leveraged innovation while keeping the lights on. So it's that combination of keeping the lights on, that 80% Brian talked about, modernization at the same time, and enabling innovation at the same time. So we're collapsing that 80, 15, 20 into one simple stack here. And with that, I will thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. And back to you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Paul. Up next, we have our first panel of the day, and we have Jason Miller moderating this panel. Jason is the executive editor over at the Federal News Network. Jason, over to you.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for Kirsten, and of course, all the folks and my friends at HARC. It's always a pleasure to be here. I have to give a shout out to the good old Tom Suter. Haven't seen him in a while. I guess earlier this summer we had a chance to catch up, but it's always a pleasure to attend these events. As you heard, I am Jason Miller, executive editor of Federal News Network. You can find us on 1500 AM and of course on federalnewsnetwork.com. Before we get started, I want to get you started, get you warmed up a little bit. We had some good speakers to kind of get you going, but in case that coffee, you need that second round of coffee, I'm going to give you some things to think about. And since we're focusing today on data and statistics, here are some data and statistics to get you going. All right, here we go. First number, 60 and 21. Think about it. That is the number of employees, 60, and the number of agencies, 21, who graduated from the first data science reskilling and retraining program. We know that this is a big push going across the government to get people to understand the data science, to become more data scientists. We don't have enough in the world. This is a good start. Okay, next one. 54%, 485%. Total data-related spending rose 54% over the past 3 years. That's according to Deltek GovWin analysis. While investments in artificial intelligence and machine learning jumped 485% over the same period. Huge investments going on across government, hence why the chief data officers are on this panel, but also getting a lot of attention across the government. And the same thing with why the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced analytics, and the like are very popular topics. Okay, last one, here we go. 318,000. Now, if you've seen me moderate before, you know I always like to come back to this number, but 318,000, that's the number of total data sets on data.gov. If you've been around as long as I have, you remember when data.gov first started, and everyone's very excited that it reached 5,000 or 10,000 data sets. Of those 318,000, 280,000 of them are from the federal government. The rest are state, local, city, county, and other governments. Now, of those 280,000, NOAA accounted for 115,000. Commerce, NASA, Interior, and FEMA round out that top 5. There you go. A couple pieces of data statistics you can bring home to your family and friends tonight at dinner and really amaze them with all the things you know. All right, for our panel today, I've asked each of our panelists to take 3 to 5 minutes and tell you something you don't know about how they're using data and meeting the goals of the federal data strategy to meet mission effectiveness. I don't do bios. We're not going to talk about what the Commerce Department does or what FEMA does. If you don't know, you can look them up. And if you don't know who these folks are, I'm sure you can find them on the Google. Also, ask questions. Remember, I get paid to ask questions. They'd much rather hear from you. Please make this interactive. I'll be monitoring the Q&A chat as we go along and interrupting our panelists to make sure your questions get asked. And then finally, most importantly, please remember to answer the poll questions as we go through today's panel. That's how you ensure you get your CPE credits. So with that being said, let's get the party started, so to speak. We're random. I pulled that out of the hat. And Kathleen Kaplan from FEMA, the CDO at FEMA, why don't you take it away? Lead us off.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathleen Kaplan. I'm the FEMA Chief Data Officer, and I'm also dual-hatted, and as a lot of us CDOs are, as the Director for the Enterprise Analytics Division. And so I don't have an office of the Chief Data Officer right now. I'm trying to convene one. So I heavily use my data management branch. I have 3 branches under me: data management, I'm doing an IT modernization program, and also analytics and communications. Sorry, that's my other branch. So that's where all my statisticians lie, in the analysts and communication branch. I just want to put a plug out there. We are hiring. I am hiring. I have at least 7 positions that are going to be hitting USA Jobs, and I'm looking for a data management chief. So If you're interested in those areas and want to join FEMA, we have a great mission. Our mission is helping people before, during, and after disasters. I mean, what could be better than that? From the data, federal data strategy side, we're doing whatever we can to implement the ask from the data strategy. And one of the things we just did this year was start a data stewardship community of practice. So that's pretty exciting. And so information from this community of practice is funneled to the Data Governance Council, which I chair for FEMA. I'm also on the Data Governance Council for Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security is FEMA's, headquarters, which Preston is also a member of. So that's my segue to Preston.
Oh, but I got to ask my one question before we get started.
Okay.
Follow up. Don't. So when you go through those three branches, data management, IT modernization, analytics, and communications, maybe give us a top line what the goals are or what your priorities are for each of those areas, if you can, because I think people are interested on how you're breaking them down and how what are each of these branches doing for FEMA.
Right. So when I came into FEMA, I'm basically a recent hire. I'm still calling recent. It's like a year and a half now. So when I came in, I was given these different tasks to do. And one of the things I realized was what you had said earlier, Jason, is, concerns about the staffing. And so what I did through attrition, basically, and through my empty vacancies was I made the analysis communications branch heavily focused on statistics. So the way we hire in the government, we have to have these series. And I thought that series was the closest to all the different series that we can use. So statistician is close to computer engineers and data science, which doesn't have a series right now, and some other series that are relative, like I'm a computer science, so all my degrees are computer science. So we have the biggest statistical core now in this branch that I have, and I hope to continue doing this. So if you're related, you could, related degrees, you can apply for these jobs. The data management branch handles all my data strategy concerns, basically. It's a very small branch right now. I'm trying to grow that. I'm going to use that to propel the new Office of Chief Data Officer, knock on wood if we can ever get funding behind that. We're doing workforce studies for that. So they handle all the data governance council issues that we have. So this branch I heavily use for the Data Governance Council. The last thing is the IT modernization program, which we're just kind of starting up. This will sunset the legacy system, data warehouse system at FEMA, consolidate hopefully all the different types of needs that the programs have under one big umbrella. We did government speak. We did the life cycle cost estimates and some other required documentation we need. It's a $400 million program, so it has heavy oversight from our headquarters, Department of Homeland Security. And so we're going through the wickets with that. That's it.
All right. It's all really helpful because I think when you lay out who these folks are, it gives our audience some questions to ask you later on. You had thrown it over to Preston. Preston, you are the Chief Data Officer over at CISA. Take it away.
Hey, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Dr. Kaplan. My name is Preston Ward. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. We're the newest DHS component. So within CISA, we are really focused on critical infrastructure, doing like a holistic risk analysis, working with a lot of our stakeholders across the government, state and local governments, and critical infrastructure owners and operators. So within CISA, I like to talk about the data we've got, right? So we've got a lot of very traditional big data, as people think, like cyber data. We have a lot of cyber sensors that we kind of manage. We partner with a lot of departments and agencies on the cyber sensors they've got. We have a lot of cyber threat data. So a lot of that big data we talk about, a lot of volume, it's coming in fast or just, constantly moving. At the same time, we have a lot of what I have heard termed wide data. So we do a lot of physical security assessments. We do a lot of work on emergency communications at the state level. So data sets that are really rich and interesting, but they're not big data. They're not coming in wide. They're not coming in fast. We don't only have a couple thousand physical security assessments, but it's really important to find ways to marry up those physical security assessments like emergency communications, interoperability status with that cyber data to figure out, where is there risk in particular critical infrastructure sectors, or these other concepts we have, which are called national critical functions, things that go on within the country that are so important to the American economy and way of life. So with CISA, that's kind of what we focus on, how we use our data, that coupling that big data with wide data. Two things we're doing, which I hopefully will be of interest to folks. We've really tried to take a step back and think about how can we do modeling of our data better? How do we do that, especially at the conceptual level? So we've created internally a conceptual enterprise data model. I'm trying to get that ready for a public release, hopefully later this calendar year. Hopefully give some folks some insight into how CISA, how we do our modeling, how we view the world, helps to harmonize concepts and definitions, think about relationships. So I'm hoping we're using that internally. I really want to get that out there for the rest of the world to see as well. Hopefully it's helpful to them. On the other side, we're also partnering with internally within DHS. We have a science and technology directorate. We're partnering with them on a multi-cloud lab environment, really looking for how can we take our data we've got and really kind of accelerate the work we do around AI and ML. Sometimes that's very tough to do on production networks because a lot of times, for very good reasons, lawyers and privacy folks are a little wary about mixing new data sets, doing new cool things. So we're, pursuing this lab environment to let us do that, let us prove these things out, and hopefully then let us, use our data in new and different ways, faster and better internally, and hopefully have some of those lessons learned to move it there longer term, then be able to use that lab environment to partner more with those folks across the government, state and local level, especially critical infrastructure owner and operators. Can we share more of our data and results of our analytics through that kind of platform to them? So Jason, I'll probably stop there to let you keep on the panel moving, and hopefully we'll get some good questions out of that.
All right, I think we will. I have one quick follow-up for you as well, because this is very important. I love the fact that you're partnering with S&T on this multi-cloud lab environment. Can you just give us maybe a little more details about what that will entail? You're obviously, just by the way you're discussing it, it's multiple clouds, you're going to test out tools, but what's the ultimate goal to eventually come to?
So I think the ultimate goal is if for folks who've read the Cyber Slam Commission report, I think it was last year, talked about how DHS and CISA specifically need kind of a joint collaborative environment to work with our partners outside critical infrastructure owners and operators. They said you should have this joint collaborative environment. JCE, it's gone by a couple other names. You'll see our director talks about some of the work we're doing now with the joint cyber collaborative, so the JCDC, tying all these things together. Hopefully this lab is kind of our first step of here's how you build into multi-cloud environment, this full, kind of data stack and technology stack around the analytics that for us initially will help us do our job better, but longer term, kind of replicate that for an environment where we can better collaborate with our partners, both on, very tactical kind of cyber response activities, but I think really bigger picture, looking at risk, looking at resilience, looking at capacity building, helping folks be better protect themselves.
All right, that's really helpful. I think that's a fascinating partnership there. And you mentioned all the joint collaborative fill in the blank. I think that's going to be the next buzzword we should look out for. This GE something, right? JADC2 over in DoD as well.
Yep.
We're going to take a half-a-minute break and do a polling question. So our friends at HRC are going to put up a polling question. Please fill this out. And then Tom, be prepared. You're next.
Great.
We need some Jeopardy music or something as folks fill this out. I used to have that on my desktop, but I have to say I don't have it today. So folks know the 30 seconds or so to answer the question. Oh, there's our results. We're about equal. 46% says we're not working. We're working on it, and 46% we have not started yet. Folks, federal data strategy. Let's go, right? Tom, what's going on here? What are they doing? All right. I want to have to answer that question, Tom. Don't worry. Let's go to Tom Beach, Commerce Department, Chief Data Officer. Now, Tom, you also spent a lot of time at PTO, so you're going to tell us something we don't know about what's happening at Commerce.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jason, to be on this panel as well. Thanks, ACT-IAC. One of the things that we don't know is that according to Gartner, only 14% of CDOs have been in that position less than a year. So about 60–70% of it have been doing it for 1 to 3 years. So just to realize the context of the CDO role is kind of an interesting thing as a change agent within government. Certainly, it's something that's relatively new. And for what does that mean in commerce? It really means as a federated model, which at Commerce we have some really unique missions at the bureaus and offices, as you mentioned, NOAA, Census, PTO, economic development and administration. So we've got a lot of things going on there, but what we're actually working on, which is really kind of cool, is some climate data sharing, understanding how mitigation determines resilience. And that's a cross collaboration between multiple bureaus within Commerce. We have this mantra about commerce helping commerce, or look within, because we have such rich, unique missions that are going on in commerce. So another area that's quite interesting that Census is working on is something called differential privacy. It's a lot of mathematics that go into understanding how can we make data secure from a statute perspective, but also useful and shareable. So really cool stuff going on at Commerce. Happy to talk more.
All right. Wow. 3 to 5 minutes. Tom took that to heart, I think. I think you were one of the first people ever to come under 3 minutes.
Let's talk fast.
No, it's great. It's great. And I want to remind the folks in the audience, please submit your questions. A few started to come in, though. I think they may have been for the last set of speakers. So please continue to submit your questions. Tom, before I let you go and we open it up to the audience a little bit, you talk about this internal effort within Commerce. And one thing that's interesting about Commerce is you have a lot of data, and you have a lot of, if you will, bureaus that are heavyweights, right? Between NOAA, I mentioned them as in the beginning of the data.gov, but you have Census, huge data, trove of treasure there, but you also have smaller agencies or bureaus, Bureau of Industry and Security and others. How do you kind of herd those cats? How do you bring everyone together? Because from your role, I mean, in many ways, that's what you're there to do is herd the cats.
Yeah, I look at it from a people process technology, and I'm heavy on the people process. Well, like many others, we have a Commerce Data Governance Board, which is just a mechanism to get things done. And really what that equals, and to your point, we give everyone the same seat at the table. It doesn't matter how much data you make, it matters as to which data set is most important. And a lot of agencies may create one or two. You mentioned BIS. You know, they do, they're one of a couple that does the no-fly list, right? It's not a lot of data, but it's really critical data. And I think the recognition that it's not always about the volume and it's about the importance of it is how we get together. And it's frankly the convening mechanism that really makes it work. So that imparts the ability to go and have the tough questions about whose standard should we use, should we adopt, should we cross-collaborate, what do data sharing agreements look like? So we're heavy into outcomes, but the mechanism is this facilitation platform of a governance board and working groups.
Let's open that same line of thoughts to the entire panel about the governance side. I think, you know, having two folks from DHS is nice. I know Homeland Security Department headquarters just named a new CDO recently. That person that I'm sure Preston and Kathleen, you all work with very closely. How is DHS addressing that governance? Because again, same issue. You get a lot of data at CBP, a lot of data at ICE, FEMA, a ton of data. CISA, I didn't even know you had that. I love that terminology Preston uses, wide data. So maybe Preston start us off and then Kathleen jump in about the governance piece.
Okay, I'll take it first, and Dr. Kaplan can follow up. Certainly, yes. Within DHS, we have a Chief Data Officer Council chaired by our Chief Data Officer within the department. So within the department, some of the things we're doing just at a very high level are establishing these like broad data domains. And then, you know, depending on the component of DHS, they would be the steward of that domain, because there certainly is overlap. If you think about the immigration domain, there's more than one DHS component that's involved in immigration. You need to have a lead steward, but they need to partner up with those other components. Same thing for CISA. You know, we're lead on the cybersecurity data and infrastructure protection, but you think about infrastructure protection and all the pieces there, we're certainly going to be partnering with folks like FEMA and countering weapons of mass destruction, other parts of the department. So it's important to have these big data domains, and then at that domain level, have some governance around what's going in the domain, what are the standards used across the domain, because in order for our data to be interoperable across the department, we need to be talking, you know, at a very low level, same standards. We have the same agreements on controlled vocabularies. You know, very simple things like that are really important to data governance, and also the data quality aspect. You know, are our data sets authoritative because they're driven by a law or a statute? Are they trusted because they've gone through a process where we know they're of high quality because they meet certain criteria? And I think that's really important, both within each of our components, and then certainly across the department writ large.
And before Kathleen jumps in, real quick, Preston, you mentioned the critical infrastructure protection is a great example. Do you also bring in, let's say, the energy department, or is this just DHS for now? And maybe there's another council that you work with, energy and others.
Yep. No. Yeah. So it's councils all the way down, right? Within CISA, I've got a data council. Within DHS, we have our chief data officer. There's the broader chief data officer council across the federal government. I think, as CISA, we get our house in shape. It's easier for us to work across the department. As the department gets its house in shape, it's easier to work out then with our partners across Treasury and Energy and EPA, all these other federal departments and agencies that are, also sector risk management agencies. So yeah, I think at every level, we're trying to mature and get better so we can then work up the next level and then start doing that interoperability across.
All right. Thank you. Kathleen.
Hi, thank you. When you're talking, I'm thinking of like a million different things, right? So it's hard to stay on topic in my thoughts. But one of the things I like to think about is that, remember the Seinfeld when he was talking about reservations, and everybody can take a reservation, it's the whole thing that the reservation is important. And that's the important with data standards. We can make as many data standards we possibly want. We can adopt, we can, say, yeah, this is a great standard. It's the implementation of the standard, right? So that's where the key is. Unfortunately, like where I am at FEMA, we can make data standards, but we're federated within ourselves. So not only like commerce, I was at commerce, which is fun. I was at commerce and I was on that data governance board at that time. And now that I'm at FEMA, I'm part of the DHS, the Data Department of Homeland Security Governance Council, and I chair the Data Governance Council for FEMA. And so this is the problem we have, because FEMA is federated within itself, and then DHS is federated within itself, and we just talked about commerce being federated. So it's very interesting when you have such a different, diverse, even organization across FEMA-wide. We have 10 regions that we deal with and headquarters. And so there's right now over 110 systems at FEMA that we're trying to, wrangle and figure out, and what really is an authoritative data source that we can use. And those kind of questions are constant on our minds. But we work together all the time. Like Preston and I work together. We were working when I first got here, FEMA and across DHS wide. And there's a lot of cross organizational work that's going on. FEMA itself, I'm involved with an MOU right now with Census, which is a part of Commerce. Part of that is the differential privacy issues that we have both at FEMA and Census. With these new executive orders that popped up this year with climate change. I want to say climate change. I know there's other terms for it. And also equity. Those are concerns right now for data. And so having this cross-organizational kind of groups and discussions it is extremely helpful all the way around. So I'm not sure if I answered the question. I'm kind of going off topic, but I'll let you go back.
Well, we will. There's plenty to talk to. I want to find out maybe more about that MOU with Census in a second. But before I do that, we do have a question from the audience. We got a couple here on workforce questions. So let me try to start with Gail's. She writes, how do you develop the AI data analytics skills of your workforce? I'll just throw it out to the entire group. Anyone want to pick that one up?
I can real quick. So when I came in, FEMA only hired, when I first came in, it seems like 2210s, which are IT folks, and 0343s, which is a very general series. So it's hard in both of those series to get the data expertise that we need. So one of the things is we try to make available is like 4 hours every pay period of just personal development time that you're searching, you're looking at different things, trying to get up to speed. And a lot of times we just have to throw the people in the deep end and let them figure out and swim and try to give them as much guidance as possible.
Preston or Tom?
Yeah, I can jump in there quickly, and but certainly it's a critical thing, right? And Dr. Kaplan talks about it. It's tough to kind of find these people given the reality of how we hire federal employees. So you've really got to grow a lot of folks internally. We've really been trying to figure out how do you push better data acumen? How do you push better analytic proficiency? Some of that's through training. We had some Gartner folks come in and do a great presentation internally, talking about how to do this. So we're looking at some of their recommendations, especially about establishing some internal, like they call it like a data buddy, like an internal mentorship program. How do I take people? I've got 6 mission divisions within CISA. How do you cross-pollinate that? How do you get people some interesting expertise and new ways of looking at things across the agency? We've set up an internal data and analytics community to practice. So we meet every other month, voluntary. If you're interested in data analytics, we have speakers come in, talk about different tools and technologies and processes, hoping to kind of spur that conversation and learn from each other. But it's not easy, but it is critical. And I wish there was an easier answer, and there's just not.
Tom, you wanna round us out? You may have lost Tom there.
I think I'm back.
There you are.
Yes, Commerce loves Zoom, so it kicks me out every couple of seconds. So you guys will bear with me. At our Commerce Data Governance Board, we actually have a Get It Done working group called the MAD Skills, Maturity Assessment Data Skills. Very clever name. But what's going on there is we're actually really unearthing what's actually happening in the agencies about data science. And let's be clear, not everyone needs to be a data scientist. So I'm glad you used the term data acumen, Preston. It's really about a holistic approach on that. So we've got great data scientist programs at Census. That's actually the model I think that was used that you mentioned at the beginning, Jason, about the data scientists that did the first wave. But yeah, so we're really, as a group, we are piloting with a vendor. It's a no cost license where we're just unleashing platforms on our on the Commerce wide, and we have testers, and we're going to figure out what and evaluate what makes sense out there and what doesn't, because there's a long conversation about on-the-job training. Is it bring your own data, make it relevant to what you do, or it doesn't stick, right? If I watch a bunch of YouTube videos, it's instructional, it's interesting, but it didn't change anything. So those are the approaches we're taking, which is having again, everyone had a seat at the table, understand what each other's doing, and say, okay, we're all going to go arm in arm and check out the latest and greatest platforms and see if there's actually something there. Because, you can either build your own program, use someone else's, or build your own. And each of those have different pros and cons. But, what we're looking at Commerce is unleashing the capacity for data skills training and not prescribing each bureau and office has to do one thing or the other. So that's our approach.
Tom, real quick, just a quick follow-up on that. It sounds like it's almost like a pilot program you're doing with the training piece. Is there anything more you can tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I prefer not to say the vendor, but it's cool. We've been able to work with them, and it's important to know something called personas. This is actually something that came from the federal data strategy, right? So this get your data healthy world situation, and then we took it to another level and said, okay, we're going to define personas: data wrangler, enthusiast, executive, throughout the population of Commerce. And then there's a really critical piece, which is mapping training to these personas and availing that, because it's a little different than the competency model in government. And as Kathleen mentioned, there is no series for data scientists yet. So we can't do a literal competency modeling like we normally do vis-a-vis OPM. What we can do is create our own personas that exist in our population and address them.
All right, that was really helpful, Tom. You may have cut out there at the very end, so we'll see if we missed something or you just Commerce kicked you off. We're going to do another polling question. So our friends from HRC are going to put up a poll, and we want you to answer it. Meanwhile, as a reminder, keep putting those questions in. We'll get to them right after this. Biggest barrier to implementation of the data strategy. You know what it is, guys. It's always going to be culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's always that discussion. The technology is easy, but the culture is the problem. I've been hearing that for 25 years, and it always comes back to, why can't we just change the culture? Well, Preston laughs because he knows.
Yeah.
If it was that easy, we would have done it by now. I get that.
And that's what I spend most of my time doing is thinking about culture, because you know, that especially for, and I'm sure a lot of people will pick budget too, hopefully, but you know, it's a way you can focus on it and get folks rallied around it, because I think for all of us, yeah, we're chief data officers. There's one of us. There's a lot more people in each of our departments and agencies that really, we need them to kind of step up and run this too.
And it also comes back to, knowledge is power. And unfortunately, that creating that culture of sharing that, hey, I'm going to give up my data to you and you're going to give it back to me. That's a little, it's for all these years, we still have that challenge. But look at that, 64% said building a culture that values data. There you go. That's even different than just the culture issue. That's valuing of data. So very interesting results. Let's get back to our questions. Easy one, Preston from Molanda. Can anyone join CISA's community of practice, or is it available only to internal employees?
Unfortunately, it is only our internal employees and contractors. Certainly, hopefully, this might be an area where at that federal level at some point, maybe we'll do some more things across the government. And I think actually, I think GSA and some other folks do some really good things too, if you go look for that.
All right. Another one came in from Annette. This is for Tom. Tom, what are the personas defined at the Department of Commerce? Do we have Tom back?
Great question. Yep, I do. I'm back. It's actually something called the Edison framework, and it's easily Googleable. It's actually something that is a partnership with a university in Holland. NIST was involved. It has a bit to do. There's a NIST 1500 personas as well. It comes together in 12 different flavors of personas, and it's anywhere from just the business analyst to the data analyst to the data steward to like I mentioned before, a wrangler, platforms, and then it gets somewhat into the cloud-based and the big data side where it's more technical. So one of the cool things we were able to do with it was actually take this framework, and one of the CDOs over at Trade, ITA, was able to visualize it through Power BI, and we actually create these radar diagrams where we're able to see in the different disciplines from 0 to 5, what does your radar graph look like, right? And it was just a really clever way to take something sort of basic, turn it into a visual that we can use. So, we're living what we practice, and turn it around and go, okay, this is our way to understand, the personas and where we're trying to get to. Because again, not everyone needs to be a 5 out of 5 in everything. The important part is data is a team sport, and not everyone's going to be an expert there. So what you're doing is you're building small teams that play well together and create the perfect circle of a radar being a circle. Thanks.
Kathleen, Preston, let me just ask you both to weigh in on that as well. Whether or not you're using the personas or another way, are you starting to define or put or better understand who's a data wrangler, who's a data steward? Preston's shaking his head, so go ahead.
Yeah, we did something similar, although Tom's stuff sounds cooler. So we did kind of a stakeholder analysis within my office. Said, okay, who do we talk to? What roles do they have? And it's along the same lines of like, as we're thinking about training and all these different activities, how do we segmentize those a little bit and have it so it's more tailored? I really like the way Tom kind of approached, and I think that's, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to go take a look at that as well and see if there's something we can adopt for ourselves.
For me, FEMA, not to that granularity. Like we just have the major descriptions of staff, and we're trying to figure out, where in FEMA those staff are. So like who has those skills? Who really does? Like they could be coded as something else. Like I'm coded as a very general, in the government, we call it 0301, but I could be categorized as a computer scientist, computer engineer, so forth. So we have to find those people that already exist. And we're hiring. Remember, if you're listening, probably CISAs too, or we're hiring.
And probably commerce too. What's interesting about the data piece is when we talk about the need for a job description. I know OPM and I know the data strategy and others have called for this. Evidence of Foundation-Based Policymaking Act created the CDO role. A lot of this has been pushing towards it. I mean, is that really a big showstopper? Maybe is not the best word, but not having that job classification, is that really a big deal for agencies? Because around who works in data, who doesn't, and how that job is done. I'm not sure if I'm asking that question in the most appropriate way. Tom, you kind of shook your head a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump on that. It's kind of like, I feel like a lot of what we do in government is a little DIY, in the sense that while we have all these structures in place to get through the front door, once someone's in the house, then it's game on and we get them to do what they need to do, and it brings value, right? But it's this sort of maze to get from outside to inside, for which this is probably matters more. Because what you don't want is a system that's filtering out folks that are talented and filtering, giving us ones that are not. There's a really good example recently where they did a data scientist cert across government. It was a collaboration of I know folks, Dan Morgan at the CDO Council knows a lot about this at Transportation, but they were able to create a cert for which agencies could just come in and get these pull data scientists from, and it was front loaded, meaning all the work to filter out who were the best candidates happened early on. So the resulting list was a true gold list, not a list that just sort of made it through because they answered some questions, a certain way, right? So we're trying to get ahead of that. I think it matters more when we get, from a performance and rating perspective. But in reality, getting things done, folks are not telling each other how to get their job done every day. It's just you come in and you do it. It's my thought.
All right, we have Tina writes more of a comment than a question, but look for those with library and information science degrees. Maybe has a little bit of experience there that says maybe she has one or knows people who have had one. They make great data scientists, sounds like. Preston, were you shaking your head there?
I was. We've talked about the same thing internally, because very similar. Like we just went through trying to hire a position. It was labeled as a data management. For me, data management meant something a little different, because the cert I got back was very heavily traditional DBA kind of roles, like that kind of database data management. Like, no, I need data management who understands governance and stewardship and critically thinking about data. And then some folks are like, yeah, those folks with the library science skills are really important to that because they understand how to think about data, how to organize data, and kind of the importance there. So yeah, I think her comment's spot on. It's a great, we have to look a little non-traditional in places to find some of these kind of data roles we need to fill.
And Allison brought in the idea of this health information management professionals as well. I think what it comes down to is just because you don't have a data degree, everyone is involved in this data world, and it's just be able to think critically. And then the training piece, let's maybe talk a little bit about the training piece. We know we went through the first set of data skill cohorts, the data science cohort. The second one I think is in progress. Have you all been able to either take advantage of that through your own internal folks, or B, what about that training piece? What about this upskilling, reskilling that excites you?
I'm happy to jump on that real quick too. Again, sorry. So at the CDO Council, I work with agencies across government, and there's a working group I actually kind of help lead, which is the data skills working group. And then the result of all of this quickly is on resources.data.gov. There's about 11 use cases in government about data skills training. What does it mean? How is it being done? Is it a macro, micro, holistic? Again, HHS, library medicine, they're doing some really phenomenal work. All the way to the court system that had a very localized need and solved it through training. So really cool use cases there. There's even a toolkit on how to build your own. So I just want to do a little shout out there for the CDO Council team that worked on that, and as well where to find it, because there's some really great examples, and that's where the buy or build concept or build your own came in, which was, are other agencies having that? And I think it's really spurring the conversation is, can there be some sort of federal wide ability to hop on a quote unquote contract, right? Is there some mechanism for folks to really get what they need to get done instead of going through the entire procurement cycle for one unit of training versus some capacity builder across government? So those conversations I think are exciting. That excites me.
And if you haven't been to the CDO Council website, it's probably cdo.gov, and or do a quick Google search for CDO Council, it'll come right up. It's actually a very good website, Tom. So thanks for doing that for us. And going back to Tom's piece, the federal financial management workforce is doing something very similar. There's an RFI that got put out from GSA and OMB and the CFO Council trying to set up this one-stop shop for training. So you can it's not a learning management system. In fact, I'm writing a story about it, though you'll see that maybe later today or tomorrow. But anyway, it's same concept. Make finding training easier. And speaking of training, we have a question that came in from Sergey. He writes, my users are really interested in using AI for their works, but they're not really very, I guess, technical savvy. Do you think a low-code AI can help, or should we hire a full-time data scientist? It's a little technical, but I guess the question is, would a low-code platform or low-code AI piece of technology help kind of the user who maybe is not as data savvy or technology savvy as they could be? Any thoughts on that?
I may jump in on that one to start. Yeah, I think the answer is probably both, right? You both want a kind of an auto ML solution for the users who maybe aren't as technically savvy. If you can go get a couple, one or two data scientists who can kind of get deep in the weeds and do their own exploratory analysis, that's great too. But there's a great range of commercial products that help, if you understand your use cases, to help you kind of do that data science work about, here's my data set, here's the answer I'm looking for, here's the facets I want to build around. And so I think there are some wonderful commercial tools out there that can help folks do that. But I think, before you jump into right to any technology solution, it's really about the use cases. What are you looking to get out of it? I think in a lot of cases, as you're maybe getting into that kind of AI space or ML space, certainly always look for use cases that are going to be, very, high reward, low regret. Find the use cases where if you get it wrong the first time, you're not doing some serious damage to your agency's mission. So that's important as well, especially for some of these commercial tools, these, auto ML, low code tools. There's a lot of black box magic that's going on behind the scenes you don't understand. So definitely, make sure you know your use cases and the impact, depending on if the machine tells you to do a thing, that, either you can reverse engineer it yourself, or it won't be that detrimental if maybe the machine gets it wrong.
Tom or Kathleen, any comments on that area? I know it's a little more technical than we're used to.
I'll just say this. I think it's a good point, Preston. It's bi-directional, top down, bottom up. I know the success we had at the Patent and Trademark Office was a pairing of a data scientist with a SME, someone an expert in that, and giving someone like that an Alteryx or an easy to use sort of ML system makes them a more informed customer, I think, and getting the requirement setting piece, which is really, really hard to do. And understanding what problem you're trying to solve. Because if you're right, if you just throw technology at it, we're not sure if the problem's being solved. Because once that happens, it's all about adoption at the customer level. And if they're not involved, there's no trust, and it's really sort of dead on arrival. If you don't get a sort of a combination of it's magically being built by someone really smart called a data scientist, or it's rudimentary being built over here but can't be scaled. So it really is a beginning and of a marriage to me.
And just to piggyback on, it just depends on what you need. Like, do you need really a data scientist? Like, I have agnostic data scientists that can go out and handle different types of areas within FEMA, or do you need somebody that's knowledgeable about that area, a SME in that area who knows data, and knows data techniques? So those are two very different things. If you get a data scientist, a true data scientist, and you have them working on mostly your SME stuff, they're not going to be very happy and they're going to leave. And vice versa. If I start, because we are agnostic and we are forward facing, we're enterprise wide. If I don't have those type of people, if I start to hire people that are very specific and they want to dive down into the specifics more so, then they're not going to be happy either. So it just depends on exactly what you want. You have to figure it out.
All right, thank you for that. A couple more questions have come in, so let's go through them maybe very quickly. We still have one more polling question to go through. Don't forget about that. But Hannah writes in, what are your organizations doing to test, evaluate, validate, and verify your artificial intelligence? And more specifically, what are your organizations doing to assess data quality? Kind of two separate questions there. I'm not sure if you all are more comfortable with the data quality discussion versus the AI question, but I'll open them up for both of you, to everybody.
I can maybe just start quickly on the at least on the data quality side, and we'll take it from there. But certainly, yes, data quality is important. Data quality has to come before the AI and ML, because you want to make sure you have trust in the data you're using for these algorithms. That's where you should start, regardless. And certainly, data quality is a critical thing. You need to be looking at the data assets you've got. and figuring out, what is your criteria to have a data asset, let's say, be trusted? Does it have a data quality plan that is up to date? Does it have an assigned data steward? Is it using the most up-to-date data standards? So that is kind of a continual process that folks need to be paying attention to, because that, once again, the data quality is so important before you start feeding these data assets to these algorithms and expecting these. And at the same time, I think as you're starting to experiment with these different algorithms and AI tools, being able to replicate what they're doing, make sure it's, reproducible and kind of defendable is really important before you turn these things loose in the wild, which is why that kind of lab environment, pilots and proof of concepts are so important to take these things slowly.
Kathleen or Tom, you want to jump in on either data quality or AI and data quality?
Well, the data quality is, how trustworthy is your data, basically, right? So, like I had mentioned before, we tried to figure out the authoritative data sources because we have 110 systems out there. So which one are we going to say is the authoritative data source? And then what do we do when we rectify, conflicting data, all those different concerns. So that's more my area. The other area is more the CIO, which is in a different office.
And I'll just sort of add to that, because of the rich diversity we have at Commerce, agencies like NOAA and NIST, I mean, they set standards on data quality and they live it and they breathe it and they have processes for it. So they can't really get it wrong. So there are these instilled processes. And I think what's most interesting for our organization is to create the common baseline of what data quality means across commerce by understanding where it's being done well elsewhere. So it's a lot about benchmarking and conversation at Commerce to get that set in motion. And again, about sort of the artificial intelligence side, it's, watching the watcher code review, algorithmic code review, it's just a long-winded process that I don't know there's a really good answer as to what is good AI code, because it's really fundamentally could be written in multiple languages and completely different approaches. And I'm not sure we can have, build it and then build it again to check for it. One of the interesting things that NIST is doing is understanding frameworks, good things to ask when you're figuring out, does this algorithm have bias in it or not? Right. So there are approaches to frameworks, but to say there's a sort of a acceptance criteria from an IT requirement as to whether the AI works or not, it's sort of like, did the chatbot give me the right answer or not? Like, I think it's very challenging. And I think this is part of the conversation that's going to continue to happen. And I think it's interesting when we juxtapose it to the private sector, because no one's asking how Waze works or Amazon works. We just use it. Right. But the responsibility, of course, in government is much different than that. So, I think it's an important conversation we have now, because if the adoption goes that other way, it's too late.
All right, a couple quick follow-ups that people had. Let me go back to the personas. Harry writes, Tom, remind him again where we can find the personas, the list of that personas that you mentioned.
Sure. If you Google Edison framework, you should be able to find it. It's a data science framework.
All right.
And I know I spoke, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, no, it's good. Maybe we can put that in the chat. If the folks from HR can put that in the main chat for everyone, that'd be awesome. And then Karen wrote, and I'm not sure if we can remember who said this, but what was the name of the group that has use cases? I missed that. She says, I'm trying to remember who mentioned the use cases. Was that something that Tom or Preston talked about?
I mean, I was certainly talking about use cases, but I mean, those will come internally depending on your organization and your mission and your need. And I think the key there is just make sure that, make sure everyone, you all agree on the problem you're trying to solve with your data and these more advanced, algorithms and AI and ML, and make sure those use cases are, well understood. And I think that's the important part. Just making sure everyone puts some effort into that internally.
Okay. So if Karen, if we didn't answer your question, please let us know and come back around. Maybe we missed something. All right, we're pushing up against time. So let's get one from Joe in here. He writes, what are some of the examples you can share about how your CDO activities promote and support agency components to undertake digital transformation to enhance their mission operations? So examples to undertake for digital transformation and enhance mission. A little bit, it's a good question.
Right, so I lead the Data Governance Council. We have membership from across FEMA-wide at my same level. We also have the data stewardship community of practice, which is maybe you'd say a lower graded group. They're the day-to-day workers. That information gets funneled up. Everybody's allowed to come and listen in to any of the meetings. We're constantly pushing through quarterly reports, emailed out to everyone. We also do Monday minutes and things like that. So we try to propagate as much information through FEMA that we possibly can.
I'll brief this, Tom. You know, through our conversations, and it's a good point, Kathleen, about convening, as the Minority Business Administration, MBDA, you know, really took to heart what we were talking about in our working groups, and they've actually went back and started planning and have got themselves in a process where they're moving forward with the chatbot. And it's really kind of cool that a small organization can kind of leapfrog in these moments from the fact that they're sitting at the table with NOAA and Census and hearing about what others are doing and saying, okay, this is the bite-sized piece that we can do and actually make a difference there. So excited to see how that plays out.
And maybe I'll just follow up this a little bit. Now I'll steal some of the same things Kathleen said. Like I feel where I am kind of enabling some of our digital transformation really is making sure the data we've got, is it governed well, is it managed well, is it consistent, because that helps the different parts of the organization within CISA that are going to build these systems and partnering with our CIO. Do they know what data they can use? Do they understand what digital transformation really means? Because you're taking these different data sets, doing different things with them. You know, in my mind, I don't do a lot of that directly. I'm more of a supporting element in that if we have better governance and stewardship of our data within CISA, it does enable these things.
All right, so Tom, a couple things. A couple people pointed out they said that they think it was you who referenced 11 use cases either on CDO.gov or data.gov. I think that was what Karen was asking about.
Yeah, and I just tried to put it. I don't know if I can put something in the chat, but it's at resources.data.gov,
All right.
and it's called the case study. So if you type in data skills and case studies, it's 11 case studies or use cases.
All right, very good. Thank you for that follow-up. All right, let's go to a poll question, and then we're going to wrap ourselves up. So panelists, keep in mind, we're going to get that wrap-up question. What it will be, we'll figure it out. I'm going to leave you hanging. I'm going to get you prepared. Oh, this is an easy one.
Yeah.
It better, right? That's the answer should be it better, because if not, we have failed. All right, look at that. 84% said yes. Who's the person who said no? That's my question, right? All right, we're just about out of time. Before I let everyone go, I'm going to go back around. I think we start with Kathleen and end it with Tom. So Tom, we'll start with you and go backwards to Kathleen. So Kathleen, you have a minute or two to think about this. Just what's the big takeaway from our conversation? What's the message to the audience? Because we have a mix of industry and government folks. We know data is important. We know data is a new oil. We know it's a team sport. I'm going to get in front of all the platitudes that we all love to give. But Tom, from Commerce's perspective, when it comes to data, what's the message you want folks to walk away from our conversation with?
It's all about data sharing. And if you can data share, then that's where you're at in terms of maturity and all the other phrases. So, and the CDOs are very well positioned to have the landscape view on that. They're the only ones that I think their job description is to make sure data sharing happens. All
right, I appreciate the no platitudes. Preston.
I think very quickly that, yeah, you're right, Chase. We're all on the same journey. We're all saying the same thing. I think I always try to tell folks, we're all on different places of that journey, and that's okay. If you're a little further back and if you're further ahead of us, then please let us know, because there's probably things we can learn from you. I always tell folks too, like, be great partners with your CIO and CISO, because they have roles here as well, and also be very good friends with your lawyers and privacy people, because they're part of this as well. So once again, team sport, it really is a team sport, even at those kind of levels.
But I think it's an important reminder that the data comes from so many places. You have a security or privacy side, you have a mission side, that if you don't bring all those folks together, if you're just in any financial managers, acquisition folks, hiring folks, if you're only talking to your own people, you're missing the broader picture. I think that's a great point. Kathleen, you get the last word of the day.
Awesome. No, I agree with everybody. We all work together. So we're all pals, all the CDOs. And I'd like to just also leave, though, that I know one of the questions was like, I forget what it was, but I would have said security and privacy are the biggest barriers, because we want to get the information out there, but we're the government and we have certain rules that we have to follow. So sometimes you see information that's out there on Google or whatever, but we don't have that opportunity. We can't do that. So we're working the best we can, just like Preston said, we work with our lawyer, privacy offices, everything, to try to get as much information out as we possibly can. And we're working hard. All of us are working hard at it.
And most importantly, FEMA's hiring, right? You're looking for a job, you're ready to move on. Kathleen can help you out maybe. All right. Well, panelists, you did an excellent job. I really appreciate your time. And audience, thank you for being good participants. So virtual round of applause for everybody. And I throw it back to Alyssa. Take it away.
Thank you, Jason.
Oh, Kirsten,
and
sorry. I'm so
okay.
used to dealing with Alyssa. Kirsten, take it away.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, panelists. Up next, we have our second panel of the day, and we will be hearing from Dave Neisper moderating. Dave is a tech reporter over at FedScoop. Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Kirsten. If everybody on my panel wants to cam up, I will give you a second to do so. See two of you. All right. So my name is Dave Neisper, tech reporter at FedScoop. Very excited to be covering this panel on AI, emerging technology, and data analytics. Before we begin, I just want to remind the audience to submit questions on your own throughout the Q&A section, and we'll be going through them throughout the panel. We also have some poll questions we'll be throwing out throughout. Send them as you go. Also remember, those poll questions are critical to your CPE credits. So I'll now introduce the panel. If everybody could just wave when I say your name and title, and then from there we can get into, I'll circle back around and we can get into what you guys have been doing on the AI front. So first we have Brett Vaughn, Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer and AI Portfolio Manager with the Navy. We have Oki Mek, Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer with the Department of Health and Human Services. Laura Krupp, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Pamela Ism, Director of Artificial Intelligence and Technology at the U.S. Department of Energy. Ed McLarney, Digital Transformation Lead for AI and Machine Learning at NASA. And Henry Sowell, Chief Information Officer at Cloudera Government Solutions. So I want to start by just circling back around, and maybe you guys can give us a little bit of an update on what's been happening with AI and emerging technologies at your respective agencies and what you're seeing on the industry side as well for our industry panelists. Brett, maybe we can start with you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. So Brett Vaughn, Navy Chief AI Officer, where I'm responsible really for raising the service's awareness on AI. And in general, developing and executing a service AI strategy, and really in whole the application of artificial intelligence against impactfully against our priorities in warfighting, sustainment, and readiness. If you look across our portfolio, we're interested in AI as it supports or fuels autonomy and unmanned systems, of course, decision aids, as well as the more rudimentary types of AI that help in the back office with typical office tasks. All of them, and if you look at our what's on our plate, we have technical challenges to overcome. We also have organizational and cultural challenges to overcome. We weren't born digital. AI is somewhat easier if you are a software company or you're a quote unquote born digital. We're an organization hundreds of years old, 227, I believe. And, for us, getting digital, which is predicate to being effective in AI, is we'll just say we have to work at it. So it's a constant challenge. It's widespread. So, but happy to be here and drill down and talk about any of those areas in detail. Thank you.
Oki, what's the latest at HHS on the AI front?
Good morning. Thanks, Dave. So what we're trying to do at Health and Human Services is to manage risks and mitigate cost overrun in terms of projects and use cases around AI and machine learning. There's a lot of work that's going on around this domain. Health and Human Service is a very federated, big agency. The business owners acquiring and building AI, buying AI products and services. We just want to make sure that we do it responsibly, making sure that the work doesn't violate any laws or regulations or any policies that are in place. Secondly, we want to make sure that we have this ecosystem of support, because AI, machine learning, it's a new, innovative, transformative domain. The failure rate is going to be high. In even just IT project, the failure rate is quite high, but with new emerging technology, it's going to be lower. It's going to be really high. We want to make sure that we bring folks together and collaborate and share information, any best practices, lessons learned, any challenges or pitfalls that will help manage risks or lower the risk for the department, as well as avoid cost overrun. And really just to educate and train folks around AI and machine learning in the art of the possible, and also having the same understanding and definition of what is AI or machine learning, bots or RPA. Without clearly defining that, it's hard to shape the strategy for the department. So it's about education and training as well, and really just culture shift or culture change into more of a data, digital centric culture. So that's really the goal for the department.
Laura, what about you? What's happening at the Federal Reserve Bank?
Thanks, Dave. So I'm giving an update on the Federal Reserve Bank today, but need to start with the views that I am expressing are my own and not necessarily those of the Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve System. There's a lot happening in the AI front. We're working on moving from an era where we've delivered a lot of exciting pilots to making sure that those pilots are actually getting adopted into frontline activities in the way that we've expected. So there have been many exciting pilots over the past few years, but solving for adoption and frontline adoption is really our focus. We are looking at it as a three-legged stool, making sure that we have the focus on AI and machine learning, along with standards and policies and governance that are needed to unlock and enable some of these new use cases, along with having the technology and the tooling and the data management. For us, making sure that we have the technology infrastructure to deliver models at scale and not need to embed them behind a dashboard or embed them into an application, but can actually manage them separately and then offer them up as services is a key part of that focus. And I love the comment on shared language. Folks think AI means different things, machine learning means different things, even data science means different things. And so making sure when we work with our partners across the bank and the Federal Reserve System that we have that shared definition is really important to make sure we're working toward the same thing, not just spinning our wheels.
Pamela, what's the latest at DOE on AI, emerging tech?
I would say one of the things that we're looking at is AI labeling and annotation standards. Seems to be that there is some consistency that needs to occur there, and that's going to vary depending on the different organizations. But that is something that we are looking into. I'm fortunate enough to be the director over the AITO office. So we have listening sessions with the department to get an understanding of what's going on. And as we start to formulate our strategy, our AI strategy, we're having these listening sessions. So I get to hear quite a bit as far as some of the concerns, and these labeling and annotation standards come up a lot. The other things that we're doing in addition to listening sessions and working on our AI overarching DOE-wide AI strategy, a couple of things that the department is focused on is managing the AI assets. So I heard Oki talk about risk, And another thing that we have to get a good handle on, and you always hear me talk about that when I talk, is those assets. So what are we doing to better manage our AI and ML assets? Because it's a little bit different than some of the traditional software components. And then we're looking at AI to address the mission. So we're going after using AI to address some of the climate challenges and identify what's going on in the environment that's contributing to health conditions and just disadvantages for communities. So we are leveraging AI to do that. And then AI at the labs is just fundamentally evolutionary. They are looking at next generation AI, NNSA the same. We're looking at next generation AI and what are some things that we can be doing to not only advance how we use AI, but how we advance AI as a whole. So that's pretty exciting. There's more, but again, in a nutshell, we're going after the mission and leveraging AI to address the mission challenges.
Ed, let's talk about what NASA has been up to on AI and data analytics.
Hey, thanks, Dave. So I think we find ourselves in a similar kind of place as Laura mentioned. We've had a lot of prototypes and pilots and some operational use across NASA. And we really view this as the time to scale our use of AI, make it more and more useful for everybody across the agency. Related to what Brett was saying, I see kind of three layers of our use of AI. One is actually embedded in the systems that we and our partners deploy. Another one is in conducting all the research, science, engineering to create those spacecraft, aircraft, scientific instruments, et cetera. And the other one is in our business functions. We call them mission support, human resources, finance, and those kind of things. And so in order to help folks across all those three layers of our workforce embrace AI, we're doing a little bit of seed funding on practical application projects, additional pilots, especially where they can show cross-domain application. We're working on getting the tool platforms in place and through our security processes, working on the upskilling, as Oki mentioned. Definitely want to augment the skills our workforce has already got with additional capabilities, amplifying capabilities from AI and machine learning. We're working on our data sets, AI enabling our data sets with a sister thrust called the data thrust. And we're also just working on building community, having, helping all the folks out there who are adopting these things tell their stories with one another and figure out ways to share, collaborate, and do transfer learning. So those are the main things we're working on.
And Henry, bring it all together for us. What are you seeing on the industry side of things and maybe some of the agencies that you are working with?
Hey, Dave, thanks very much. It's been an interesting path for me. I've worked on the FBI side since 2009, doing machine learning for counterterrorism work when I was in the government. And coming over into Cloudera has been an interesting path, kind of watching, a lot of the things that the panelists we're talking about today are really relevant to what we're seeing. So we help enable big data and machine learning AI projects across the government space, everything from federal civilian, where we're working with the U.S. Census Bureau to enable one of the largest data science organizations to be successful on their front, to the Department of Defense and intelligence community. And I think one of the things that was really key, what I'm seeing from an industry perspective that at least 3/4 of the panelists brought up so far is how do you get out of that prototype phase? And that, the data shows that only 35% of these projects are actually making it to production, right? And that is something we've got to break through that ceiling and start having being more effective in how we do that. And so that comes with, everybody here is working through that process on how do you do that. We try to work on that from the technology side and helping to partner with organizations on that front. One area that I'm extremely excited about recently was a success at the IRS, where we were able to help the organization and through partnership get GPU acceleration on their R&D program that was working on fraud detection, and we were able to speed up their process by over 28 times, which, as everybody here knows, like the ability to iterate quickly and to come up with actual solutions helps you to move towards production environment. So these things are really exciting. Really glad to be a part of this panel.
So I'm going to next call for our first poll question. I think it'll segue nicely into the rest of the discussion. In your opinion, how important are emerging technologies to the future of AI and data analytics within the federal government? All right, let's see the results on that. All right, so 81% say very important, 17% moderately important, only one unsure. So very high up there, which leads me to my next question for the panel. What are you seeing on your end when it comes to emerging technologies? And what do you see as some of the critical emerging technologies that are going to help advance AI and data analytics at your respective agencies and with industry? So I'm going to start actually with Ed, because you mentioned a number of pilots that NASA had going.
So one thing that I think really helps us is there's a lot of innovation going on from major cloud providers. And so where we can get their core cloud platforms through our security processes and then iteratively onboard any emerging algorithms or emerging capabilities that they've got coming helps us stay current and modern. So leaning on cloud to help obtain emerging technologies.
Yeah, what is everybody else seeing? What emerging technologies do you see as sort of critical or foundational? Pamela?
So I think we should take advantage of the open source capabilities. So there's a lot coming out there. And I know in the federal government, a lot of times we have to be careful. We have our security protocols, cyber protocols and things like that in place. But there is just so much that is emerging in that space, particularly around data aggregation, repositories of these algorithms, and then solutions that not only house algorithms, but also can help to parse the algorithms to make sure we're getting them in the way that we need them so that we are mitigating the biases. So there are technologies out there and they're coming through the open source platforms. So I'm very excited about that.
Brett, what about you?
So I would have framed that question just slightly differently, because when I look at what we view as a set of emerging technologies, which includes AI, 5G, robotics, nanotech, biotech, additive manufacturing, they're not important so much in and of themselves as they are critically important to the objectives that the Defense Department and the Navy want to achieve. And without those technologies, and almost all of those that I mentioned are heavily dependent or based on digital and information and data to some degree, I don't see how we achieve the objectives that the President, Congress, and our Chief of Naval Operations has set out for us. So I view them as critical enablers. And if you want to get a lot more holistic, and a lot of people have said it already, but changing the way we treat data with AI in mind as one of those enablers is, I think, a really important thing. But we look at the whole emerging technology suite, and at least I do, as a predicate for a lot of what we want to do in AI, if we want to be impactful.
Okay, did you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I don't, for my personal opinion, I don't think we should focus on necessarily the technology because, since HSS is so large, we are at different stage of this journey of emerging technology. the biggest risk to machine learning or analytics is actually getting the data, or the data is not even ready for the technology. And that's why I see a lot of projects fail, because they people think they could get 50 data sets and they end up with 10 data sets. And that's, then you start overcompensating or start being biased around the data, because data could be biased as well as humans as well. But focusing on, I think there's this journey. When I think about machine learning or AI, I think about, the people, the culture, and then the data as well, before you even get to technology, right? Because people want to jump into shiny new toys, AI, machine learning, blockchain, but without data, there's no AI or machine learning. There's this natural progression that you have to crawl, walk before you start running and start getting onto that sexy technology. And that's why I think the risk is high, because we just jump in, we want to use deep learning or neural network, but one, we can't get the data, and second, the data is not ready for even machine learning. You don't even have a good descriptive analysis of your data sets. That's why there's cost overrun. That's why project fail. I think just it's different cases, but I think just focusing on the business, and there's a lot of variables and parameters that come into play when we look at technology, but it should really start with the business, and then the data, and then you start, the process as well. And then at the end, you start looking at technology, what can help you. But we shouldn't, for me personally, I don't think people should start like, hey, I want to use this technology, without really doing the due diligence.
Now, obviously, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to an AI strategy, but maybe Laura or Henry, can you talk a little bit about what you see as good steps as agencies approach AI and data analytics to really get off the ground? What strategies, best practices do you guys suggest agencies look at? Or maybe, Laura, what is your agency doing currently?
Sure. I think those strategies need to be done in partnership, and both between folks that know AI well, are familiar with the advanced data science, machine learning techniques, how we can apply them, and then folks who understand the business problems really well. Oftentimes, the first round of use cases folks think of may not be the most interesting problems to solve or the most impactful areas where we can focus AI. So coming up with the characteristics of the type of challenge that we can solve well with AI within the agency, and then looking for those in new places. We've been running projects that we've been calling lighthouse projects, where we're bringing in a new capability or a new technique that we believe, as we refine it, as we begin to champion it, explore adoption, it's going to have multiple other use cases in the bank. And then we're clustering our use cases by that. We're also looking at, again, I mentioned that tool set. I think the life cycle that's needed for data science and AI development is quite different than software development. And for a long time, we've shoehorned our data scientists and our professionals into a software development life cycle that doesn't really work and meet their needs. The need for scalability, you're developing models on a smaller environment, and then you want to run it quickly on a much more powerful environment. The need for collaboration, access to data, maybe looking at different ways to facilitate access through contextual or masking of sensitive information to streamline access. The need to train on production data is something that lower level development environments may not have envisioned in software. And then ultimately thinking through things like how important is reproducibility as we deliver these models. So both thinking about the technical environment to enable it, and then looking for types of problems in creative ways.
Henry, what are your thoughts on strategies and collaboration?
I think Oki and Laura just hit some really fantastic pieces there. From some of the things that Oki was talking about, having an effective data strategy is extremely important before you get things going crazy, right? Chasing shiny object does not help you actually get to a production goal. If you're not prepared to understand how you're going to secure it, how you're going to govern it, who gets access, who doesn't. Is my workforce prepared? Are they trained? Am I creating an environment to be successful? You're not going to find success, right? So you have to have some of those core fundamentals. You also have to understand that nothing's going to be perfect before you can execute, right? So identifying, where you're at, what you can achieve now, get success. Laura, I loved how you talked about that clustering, right? Of finding things that can have an impact today, but also that can grow out to a larger impact. That is significant and helps you, even from a government perspective for later funding and your project being successful, right? You want to be able to drive those things forward. And I think from the technology perspective, this is not just machine learning, right? This is not just AI. There's all things that you have to consider around that ecosystem, from data flow and streaming, data engineering, data warehousing. There is an ecosystem that helps to support your data scientists to be successful. You have to have those in place. And then I think, making sure that you are creating those environments and that your tooling supports collaboration, that it supports the ability to iterate quickly, that you can train your data effectively, and that you can iterate through that process quickly is really important. But all of that done in a secure and governed way is what leads to production in this case.
Pamela, I saw you nodding at some of the comments that were being made. I'm interested to get your thoughts.
I like all the comments, but I like the comments, particularly around the software development for traditional approaches is not the same for artificial intelligence, because it isn't. And I also like the comments around the need for better collaboration as we are going about with these solutions, because the thing is that, everybody's been saying how it's not about the technology, and that's true. And AI in itself is not about the technology. AI in itself is about mission challenges and addressing those challenges. And so in order to do so, we can't think about it the way that we traditionally have thought about software development. The whole life cycle it's much more incremental, it's much more iterative, it's much more agile. You are training with production data. You are training with the real deal because you have to, because the AI is going to be making real life safety decisions, right? So you gotta test it, you gotta train it well with real data. I know synthetic data is important too, but like real scenarios, real stuff. And then the other thing that was exciting to me is I kept thinking about the use cases. So it's so important to get to know the different scenarios. And I think everyone has brought this out, but it's so important to get to know the various scenarios for what the mission supports. So what are those scenarios first? And then does AI make sense? And what aspects? Is it the neural network? Is it the deep learning? Is it the machine learning aspect? But that comes second. Don't walk into it trying to make AI fit. That would be like making things overfit and underfit on purpose, right? So because you're not choosing the data properly, same type of deal. So you want to look at the scenarios and let the scenarios drive the solution. And then the efficiencies that come with AI will naturally come and surface itself.
Now, if we could get poll question number 2 up, I want to talk barriers to AI adoption. What is the biggest barrier to AI adoption that your agency is facing? Effective use of data and AI skills, the AI environment, legacy culture, procurement mechanisms, all of the above, or none?
All of the above.
And if we could get the results on that. All right, so all of the above leading by a mile. Data and AI skills, when we jump into the specifics, are leading, followed by effective use of data. So Oki, I want to talk to you first because I know you've got a hard stop at noon. What do you see as some of the biggest barriers? How would you have answered that question?
I would answer it all above and then additional. challenges. I think there's a lot of challenges around doing anything innovative and transformative. As I mentioned, just IT project alone is difficult enough. Engaging in machine learning, and I'm not even talking about AI, it's more machine learning. It's difficult. It's more of a culture shift than anything. Just educating and training folks. Keep in mind that a lot of the IT are being AI or machine learning or any innovative stuff are being acquired and built outside of OCIO as well. The business owner are building things outside of it, and that creates another challenge. But I think culture needs to be shift. But I also think that of course data is big as well. I think if you want to get into machine learning or AI, I think starting small and scaling out, but also looking at data sets that you could attain or you could acquire, and not go up to things that are things that might be maybe you can't even get the data. I think that's where projects fail when you want to do machine learning or even analytics. If you could get the data, maybe start somewhere where data could be acquired easily. I think that's the biggest challenge, and then of course data processing.
Brett, what about you? The Navy, what barriers do you see as the big ones? Would you have answered all of the above as well?
I would have, but in that stack, there's a clear leader for me, at least. It's culture and organization. Like Oki was saying, there's so many principles and practices that are key to being effective at AI. And you can call them digital. Pamela mentioned agile. Iterative, all those things are pretty different when you look at the way the Pentagon's operated for the last 10 to 20, 30 years. Like I said, we're a couple hundred years old in an organization. We're steeped in culture in the Navy and in the Pentagon, and making that shift to the practices we need to adopt to be effective AI it's a bit of a challenge. That's the big one. But right behind that, again, our technology debt, just modernizing and upgrading our tech as fast or a pace of industry. As Laura mentioned earlier, piloting to scaling, we've got a wealth of great work in the R&D and in the lab environment. For us as well, a big priority is moving those projects to scale. And of that, the greatest challenge for us is deploying AI at the edge. For us, that means possibly literally in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So it's a challenging technologic and operating environment, and one that's, that I'm constantly tilting at every day, but that's the list. But yeah, number one, culture, organization, for sure.
So we're starting to get some audience questions coming in. I want to address some of those. Alexandra asks, how do your agencies combat public distrust in AI adoption? And I'm going to tack on to that. What are some ethical concerns that your agencies are addressing that might improve that public trust? Maybe we can start with you, Laura.
Sure. It's an interesting question. And the way we've approached it is by not trying to suddenly flip the switch to doing a business process by AI that previously we had done in a more manual way. We look at it as initially a process of supplementing. Can we run both of these things next to each other at the same time for quite a while and learn from each other? Are we indeed getting better predictions with an AI model? What is the risk of it? What risk are we willing to tolerate? Are we willing to tolerate a false positive? Are we willing to tolerate a false negative? And then how much value are we placing on being to understand and explain and replicate how that AI has been used? And by understanding all of those things, it's very appropriate for some business processes. It's not as appropriate for others. And in some cases where that risk threshold is very high and we really want to understand how all the decisions are made, I still think there's great capability for AI to streamline work, help supplement work, help point analysts in the right direction. But at the end of the day, we still have a human in the loop where we're verifying that those decisions are being made.
Henry, I'm interested to get an industry perspective as well. What do you think of the public trust issue, and have you worked with agencies at all to help them sort of address these concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. The first time I encountered this was in 2009, and some of the approaches that we took, exactly what Laura was talking about, it was a law enforcement perspective, and as you know, those are high stakes situations, right? When you're talking about the possible incarceration of someone, and when we were making those decisions, a lot of that was supplemental, right? It was, hey, here's a new insight that you may not be aware of, but we still had to have a human involvement in any of those decisions, and there was verification of the data that was presented that but what was really key was seeing the successes there, because there was the identification of something that would have taken, 1,000 man hours was done in, very, very quickly. So there was success that helped with that as well, helped with the adoption, helped with the understanding of why we're doing it, but it's a slow process. And also, I think that you need to have a process set in place within your agency to be asking these questions and being introspective to your processes and questioning from an ethics perspective, are you doing the right thing? And so that's some of the things that we've done with agencies in the past was helping to one, explain the technology, explain what's happening underneath an algorithm, explain that information, so it's not just a black box. Black box is what's going to cause a lot of problems. So you have to be able to go beyond that.
While we're talking ethics, if we could pull up the third poll question. Are ethical questions around AI affecting your agency? Yes, no, do not know. And let's see the results on that. So do not know is the leader, followed by yes. I'm curious, the do not know, the ambiguity there. Why might that be the case? Does anyone care to chime in on that one?
I can chime in.
Yeah.
So
great.
my thoughts on this is from the ethical perspective, sometimes it's hard for others to understand what that really means. So that's part of probably why you're seeing the do not know. The DOE put out, or my organization is putting out an AI risk management playbook. And we ran that playbook by general counsel and different organizations to get feedback. And so before we release it, it's going to really matter and help to address some of the risks, including some of the ethical concerns. So the ethical pain points are around the fairness, or around the models making judgments based on how the model was trained. So the model was trained with one set of audience when the audience should have been more diverse. So the results of the model is, of course, the way that the trainers wanted it to be. So you want to look at things like that. You want to be sure that the models are compliant. DOE and my organization is trying to help in that space and help the stakeholders understand where some of these vulnerabilities can occur. And it's not just a cyber vulnerability, but it could contribute to cyber vulnerabilities. But these are vulnerabilities, right? These are issues that could transpire, not necessarily intentionally. It's a matter of awareness and understanding what are some of the things that we can do to prevent the inherited biases and the ethical recommendations that come about based on how we train the models and how we involved others in the training and building of the solutions, or even with the acquisition of AI solutions that already exist. We've got to have that diverse set of individuals and the humans involved, as we mentioned earlier, to help mitigate those kinds of risks. And I would encourage, as we move forward, that we will do what we can to share the AI risk management playbook. It's not perfect, but it is there to help the DOE stakeholders understand better how to go about addressing and driving the ethical considerations that we need to take into account that we normally probably would take for granted?
Since you mentioned risk management, I want to open that one up to all the panelists. How are your agencies handling AI risk management? What do you think is a good approach to take and getting your feet sort of planted on that issue? Ed, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. So I completely agree with Pamela's approach of getting out some good enough guidance, even while all of this space is still very turbulent. If we try to create perfect guidance, we might wait forever to put any guidance out. So we have created an initial kind of conversation starter, ethical AI framework for NASA, taking principles and insights from other organizations, ethical AI sets of principles. One thing that we wanted to augment for NASA was the idea of robust scientific and technical robustness to complement things like watching out for bias in your data and being explainable and all those kind of things. The other thing that we've really learned as we've created that initial framework is, number one, we need to make it real for people, i.e. getting down to the kind of a use case approach of looking at some use cases, understanding the risks that might go along with that use case, and then thinking about specific mitigations to, to take high level abstract principles and make them concrete for a practitioner. The other thing is, I think it's really important that we have a widespread discussion about AI ethics, AI risks, mitigations, and approaches. It's such a kind of turbulent, Wild West, new frontier that there's just a lot of discussion and debate that our overall communities have got to have. And even just by doing some of that discussion, we'll probably get practitioners to think about including ethical AI risks and mitigations in the work that they do.
Henry, Laura, or Brett, also curious to get your thoughts on risk management.
So I fully agree. Go ahead, Brett. Go ahead.
Thanks. So we have 5 areas of responsible AI in DoD: responsible, equitable, traceable, reliable, governable, that we're working to adhere to and make sure all our AI projects follow. When I saw that don't know response, my first reaction was if that was a purely Navy response, it's probably because we just don't have a lot of experiential data with applied and operational AI right now. A lot of our work is still in the lab, and I think one of the other panelists said it. There's a wide gap between the performance of an algorithm in the lab versus in the real world. So one, we just don't have enough hands-on yet, and two, again, we're in the foothills of accelerated AI adoption, and let alone responsible AI. So getting people to understand and use straight stick artificial intelligence is one thing. Now, when we add that layer of responsible AI, it's probably overwhelms a lot of folks pretty quickly. So I think it's more, it's part understanding, but part exposure as well. And I think as we get it more exposed to it, increase the application and the use of it, I think things like trust, confidence, and a better responsible practices will follow. Over, Laura.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. Any change involves risk. And so the move to incorporating AI into decision-making, into operations involves risk. There's also risk with not making this change. There's also risk with something that is so transformative and can not only automate tasks that we don't need to be doing manually, but also bring new perspectives and new insights to our decision-making. And at some point, there's a risk if we're not taking advantage of that. So I agree, it's providing a framework, helping people know what the guardrails are. It's getting it out of the lab and into the real world as quickly as you can, so you can test some of the adoption and figuring out ways to do that. And then on individual projects, it's going back to that confusion matrix and thinking through what is the what is the risk of a false positive? What is the risk of a false negative? And what are we willing to tolerate? And making sure the project is set up with that in mind from the beginning.
Henry, we're low on time, so I'm going to give you the final word here.
I think you've heard from a really great group here that everything they've covered is the exact answer. And so less is more. I agree with everything that's been stated from a risk perspective. Hugely important, and we can't just let it fall to the floor.
Well, we might be able to slip one of these Q&A questions in real fast. AI ML is not software, that's true, but we need an engineering discipline. The industry is coalescing around ML ops to create that engineering discipline. Interested to know if your agencies are implementing or looking into implementing ML ops. Anyone want to field this one?
We are. We've been looking at how our data scientists spend their time, and they are basically doing production engineering. They're going back and doing maintenance. They're doing all of these other things that we don't need our data scientists focusing their time on. We also are taking some of those good prototypes or pilots, and we're embedding that code into applications or behind dashboards, where then it's harder to keep up to date, harder to scale, harder to be usable by other teams. So by setting up an MLOps framework, we want to create separation, make the models available over services, and then free up our data scientists to be able to focus on new applications of AI, ultimately while we've made those models consumable across the bank.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I want to thank our panel. This was a great discussion. I'm going to flip it back over to Kirsten now because we are out of time.
Thank you, thank you. Up next, we will be hearing from two of our working groups as part of our final segments of today's summit. And these two groups have some excellent announcements and exciting news to share. So first up, we will be hearing a presentation from Ken Farber, who is the industry chair of the ATARC AI and Data Analytics Guidebook Development Working Group. Ken is a solutions architect for AI machine learning over at TechSynap, and we will also be hearing from John Griffith. John is the AI engineer over at MITRE, who is filling in for Yvonne Cole today. So Ken and John, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for your time today to talk about these two work products. I'm gonna start off with the policy assessment report. You can go to the next slide. That we've been working on for the past 8 months or so. And then John will follow with the guidebook, AI development guidebook that's broader in scope and addresses other things. Let's go to the next slide. So first off, we'd just like to thank everybody that helped, that participated, provided research or writing for the report. You can see we've got a pretty broad scope of folks involved, and it's been really fun, interesting, and rewarding effort to put this report together. So next slide, please. So just to let everybody know, sort of frame the problem out as we saw it. When we looked across, and this is starting about a year or so ago, we looked across all the activities that ATARC was involved with regarding AI. And there are a lot of interest, but a lot of the focus seemed to be on technology areas. And what we thought was it might be interesting to take a step back and look at what does the policy environment look like for AI across the federal government. Because it seems that this is a near and present challenge. You know, it's important because of the nature of the technology to get the scope of the policy right, to address everything that needs to be addressed, and to do it in a way across such a complex environment as the federal government in a way that's consistent and in some sense maybe even comprehensible. And then, of course, always recognizing that it's critical for any policy created and enforced to support and live by the values expressed in our Constitution. And I have to say something like that with the technology, though that's not usually a consideration. But AI's use cases, as we've been discussing already, span a lot of areas around cognitive analysis and even we throw around words like planning and judgment and reasoning, that they're taking the place of a lot of human workers, or has the potential to. And this is across society. So the government has this unique role, and we wanted to make sure that it was accomplished. So we thought we would put together a couple of things. We thought first we'd create a framework for analyzing the policies around AI. And then we'd apply that framework to the current, not saying that it won't change, of course, and understanding that even as we've been developing the report, the policy environment has changed and new organizations have been kicked off, and new reports and work products and policies have been developed and released. But anyway, a snapshot in time is what we've developed for the current AI policy. And then we took a step back and looked at the data that we collected and made an assessment of completeness and consistency, and took a look even at the constitutionality, not as lawyers, but just as sort of educated, interested parties. And then we've made some recommendations for improvement. And then you can see again the organizations that have been involved in developing the report so far. Next slide, please. So I kind of have to apologize for the eye chart here. And there's, considering all the things that are on this page, but we want to give you a sense of what the work was and what we've got. In the next page, we'll give you a link. We'll show you the link for downloading and commenting. We'd certainly love to get feedback from this group of folks, such deep and broad expertise in AI and in government and in policy and in implementation. It'd be terrific. But if you can, we'd love to have your public comment. But the framework itself is really this matrix you see to the left. And going down, just real briefly, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but going down the left-hand matrix, the left-hand axis, you'll see a construct we've developed. It's an ontology of policies. And we thought it made sense to create an ontology so that we've got a structure that represents the interrelationship between the different areas of policy. And you can see how the initial breakout is one set of policies are going to be related to ethics, as we've discussed earlier, but another set of policies are going to be operational. How do you create and develop these systems? And then as you follow the matrix, the axis down, you'll see that the ethics breaks down into subcategories of ethics. We tried to keep those distinct. Finally, you get to a final level where you see these terms like bias and transparency and privacy and safety that are thrown around and used a lot in policy documents. But you also have down at the operational level, you have policies for data management and user interface design, things like that. And across the top, these are the current organizations that we've seen that have developed work products, reports on policy. And a really important caveat here on this report is we are not trying to be comprehensive about all of the AI activities and projects that are underway across the government. There's a tremendous amount. We certainly didn't have bandwidth, and our focus was on policy. We wanted to get a sense of the policy environment and see where there might be gaps and see if we could make useful recommendations. And so you're not going to find projects here in AI. You're not going to even find efforts that are primarily focused on developing the tools. These are projects that have developed, or organizations that have developed policy documents, like an executive order, or like the various pieces of law that have been passed, or the security panel, security commission on AI, that kind of thing, where it's talking specifically about policy. So as we looked across these, we saw a couple of things bulletized here, just real briefly. It looks like representativeness, impact, and discrimination have not been very addressed. There've been some conversation or some language in some of the documents, but not thoroughly addressed. And while confidentiality and privacy have been prominent in some of the documents, the kinds of risks that these systems present to our society as a whole probably indicate that we should have a specific statement from the administration at the highest level about the importance of that, and emphasizing that for all AI activities throughout government. One area that we put down that we thought would be important, but then found no policies supporting, is the entire area of AI procurement. We think this is going to be critical, that we have effective rules, methods for identifying requirements, documenting requirements, assessing vendor proposals, doing those in a way and ensure that the other policies that have been created are implemented. AI development tools and standards also need to be put forth as soon as we can. NIST is on that. We're just encouraging them to get that done as quickly as possible. Outreach and citizen engagement are really important. And finally, we've got two pieces around language that's used. There's a lot of language that's used around and uses the word trust, and it emphasizes the importance of American citizens, especially, to trust the systems. We would suggest that we move away from using the word trust, because that kind of puts onus on the individual looking at the system, and move toward trustworthiness, which puts the onus on the creators of the systems themselves. And finally, one last thing around language is we feel what we saw in a lot of the documents is that some of the words that are used to describe these systems that are really analogies. When you say that an AI system learns something or that understands something, we probably need to move away from that kind of language if we can, because for a person who is just coming to this technology or doesn't have any particular training in it, but might be a key stakeholder, they're not going to be accurate if they think that what the system is actually doing is really understanding something. There's a representation of information. There's a complex statistical model that'll often mimic in its response what a human might say or do, but it's not truly understanding. And when we say that, we probably are confusing or muddling the waters. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned a little bit ago, there's the document itself for the draft for comment is available at this address. Again, we appreciate all the input. It's up for 30 business days. And then we'll be going through, if you go to the next slide, please. This is our timeline. So we're in public comment, and however much we can get from feedback from folks such as yourselves that have the expertise, we'd really appreciate that, and we'll get it into the document. And then we're discussing ways to publish and some methods we'd like to have where this would be a living document that is expanded upon as policies change and our new policies are developed. But in any case, though, will be available toward the sort of the middle, I think, of the first quarter of 2022. So a couple of months. I think that's the last slide. Yeah. Would we like, I'd be happy to take questions now, but maybe we wait till John has his presentation if that's next, and then maybe we'll have questions for both.
Hey, Ken, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I am having some issues. I've got my audio working, but I can't see anything. So I'm wondering if you could actually go through the presentation. Sure. And I'll hold on, listen for questions as well, but I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
For technical issues.
Yeah. Kirsten, could you give me a time? How am I doing on time?
Yes, we actually do need to stop in a few minutes. So 12:30 is our cutoff.
Uh-oh. All right. So that's what you get for letting me talk about the policy framework first. All right. If you want to show the slides, I'll present the, I'll talk through the guidebook. Yeah. Well, the guidebook is a different work product. It's a completely different volume. The policy framework kind of talks about, if you want to think about it this way, it talks about what we should be trying to do. We should be trying to be fair and transparent, things like that. The guidebook is a much more detailed, much more thorough discussion about how to develop the system. So we talk about data strategy, we talk about development standards, we talk about security, we do have a few slides on it that if we can show. Otherwise, I really could just talk through it, but probably be more useful.
We don't have the slides for that, so I think that's a job thing. Yeah.
Okay. So the guidebook is it's a hefty report that is about, I think it's about 180 to 100 pages right now. And we have 12, I believe it's 12 sections of the report. And it kind of follows the life cycle of developing an AI system. So it talks about data management, and it talks about development approaches. And it gets into the hows and whys and trade-offs between different approaches. Oh, there you go. Great. Okay, so if you go through the thank yous, again, we have had a lot of input. And so the purpose here again is it's around implementation. It's a framework for implementing shared analytics as well as AI. And it's documents best practices, provides again trade-offs, but it also go ahead is I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with this one, but okay, you can hold right here. The topics also deal with some of the surrounding issues around AI, because we do talk about organizational change management, and that's been a topic from the earlier panels. And we do agree that it is critical. The cultural change is sort of the end of, or it's the result of proper change management. And there's just a set of issues around there about how work, the nature of the work is changing, what kinds of work will be done in the future, what kinds of work won't be done by people in the future, but will be offloaded to bots and agents and things. We also talk about the ethics and looking at the risk of AI systems, because there's very solid evidence that as these AI systems, as they're developed and they're trained on historic data, they can integrate into their behavior and they will replicate biased behavior where the data have that behavior in them. So you have to be careful about that. And in some ways it's unavoidable. And so you have to, there's a lot of important trade-offs around the kind of training that's done and the kind of systems that are deployed. With that, we've got the guidebook itself will be released very soon for public comment. This is the link that it'll be available at. It's going to be very similar to the policy framework report, the policy assessment, where there's a form you can fill out to help us understand what your feedback is and incorporate it. Again, that'll be a 30-day comment period. And I think, you go to the next slide, please. So it's, this is the schedule. Yes. So part of finalizing the guidebook is we would like to request use cases for AI. We've got a number of them, but we'd like to get a broader, more variety in the use cases and use and implement, include use cases that are of interest to and valuable to a broader set. So if you have a use case to be included, we'd appreciate that. And these are the instructions about how to forward those and what we'd be looking for if you'd like to have your use case included in the guidebook. And then I think you go to the next slide, please. All right, so this is the schedule. It's very similar to the previous, but it'll be, the guidebook will be released for comment very soon, and then there'll be a review. And we're considering also ways to make the guidebook a living document as well. So something like one possible method would be to host it on GitHub and allow comments and have a set of folks who can edit and revise the document. Next slide, please. And I don't know if I've left any time. Okay, so I've got these two questions that have come up. Yeah, the guidebook will be available on the provided. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. It's always great to hear about the work that these working groups are putting out. Up next, we have another working group focused panel discussion, this time for ATARC's drones working group. This panel discussion is on flight patterns, collision avoidance, safety reliability concerns. For this panel, leading the discussion is the advisor chair for the ATARC drones working group and our moderator for today, George Alcazar. So Pumbaa, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing good on the East Coast. I'm out of San Diego, so definitely a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the great panel that we have today. We have a couple different angles and definitely a cross-reference of commercial to DoD/federal support and how AI is affecting the next level of unmanned systems, specifically starting with drones and moving to bigger systems, of course. So hopefully everybody's doing okay and ready. Please feel free to ask any questions at any time. Just put them in the chat, and of course, let's begin. So good morning, gentlemen. How are you guys doing? Start off with Shelby. How are you doing, Shelby?
I'm doing well, Pumbaa. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Glad to have you. It's a pleasure to have someone from DIU, of course, really big, a lot of processes and setting the standard for the federal side of the unmanned system world. And drones are growing, so technology is moving fast, and having that standard is always amazing. And next we have Brian Daly.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for inviting me to this panel today. I think it'll be an excellent opportunity to hear about the drones working group and some of the work we're doing. So
awesome. Mr. Sumad, if I say this wrong, Sumad Reina, is that right? So
you got it right, Sumad Reina. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I'd love to share what we're doing in Homeland Security with all the SUAS we have not only deployed across the border, but also our program and how we stood it up from scratch and over the last few years, and the application to law enforcement here in the CONUS environment.
Awesome. And Mr. Stephen Ellis.
Here we go. We're on Zoom and I was on mute, so I don't know what that means. But anyway, I am thrilled to be here. Awesome collaborating with these awesome colleagues in the working group. Just for the folks that aren't part of the ins and outs of the working group, we have just about the most fun topics that we can kick around. My focus here is to make sure, as the federal mission takes and incorporates increasingly these incredible capabilities that these technologies offer, that we're bringing all of that data, that information, that content operationally into the mission. So for command and control, and to bring expertise at the tip of the spear back to the flagpole and vice versa. So how do we enable the mission given the great capabilities that this technology offers? So this is a really exciting time.
Definitely technology is growing out there, and thank you all for being here. Looking forward to the panel, of course. Great diversity across, and this is great, amazing because of the fact that the unmanned system world, or drones as we know it, are very dynamic. They're out there doing inspections. They're out there doing plenty of different, whether it's underwater, in the air, or on the ground. They're doing support for whether it's medical or any type of military situations. So definitely a couple different legalities and regulations, whether you're OCONUS or outside of the U.S., outside of the continental U.S., or whether being in inside CONUS, as we call it. So definitely, let's lead off with one of the questions. Actually, the question did come in, but let's hold off on those for a minute and let's reattack here. So, gentlemen, I wanted to bring up the fact of how things are moving forward. AI is definitely being a huge part. A lot of people are learning more that unmanned systems, I like to call it maybe a drag and drop type system. The knowledge is out there, but it's becoming more based on IT backing with data delivery. And the systems are doing exactly what they're supposed to, delivering whatever payload is being used. So the first question I would like to present to y'all would be, how is your agency being affected, and where do you see it being in the future if possible, whether it's training, whether it's the next level of anything. And of course, please keep it broad. We don't need to get any, secret specifics or any type of confidentiality issues, but definitely looking forward to the base knowledge of a lot of those things. Let's start off with Brian. I know you got some great stuff going on out there. So
Sure.
how do you feel? How do you feel you guys are doing now? And AT&T is definitely a big part of stuff. So.
Yeah, well, certainly, from our perspective, there's many different uses for drones. You mentioned infrastructure inspection. Certainly, when you have cell towers, it's easier to send a drone up and inspect the tower and the equipment on the tower than it is to actually send a person up there to do that inspection. So that's a big part, and certainly makes our operations and maintenance of our systems much easier. And cell towers is just one example. We have other infrastructure, including fiber cable runs and things like that also drones are very useful for. But the other aspects are, when we look at disaster scenarios, or even just basic scenarios where we need to provide more cellular coverage than what exists, using drones to enhance that coverage or provide coverage when things go bad. That's another aspect of what we do. And also, finally, with our FirstNet operations, FirstNet obviously is a big user of deployables. They make use of those deployables in their tactical situations, and other agencies such as the wildland fire agencies that deal with those situations. We also use drones in order to provide communication and connectivity to all those agencies that are doing those. So yeah, drones is a big part of many different aspects of what we do, and a very important part.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are doing some great things out there, and I've seen personally some great things that are happening with some use cases. So looking forward to hearing some more stuff about AT&T and the future there. Shelby, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, and it extends beyond that when we talk about, some of the military uses and so forth, which I won't get into the details of that. But again, 5G connectivity along with drones, you can imagine some of the military use cases that come into play as well.
Oh, most definitely. That's a perfect segue for Mr. Shelby over here with the DIU. How do you feel things are going with your agency, and what do you see you guys moving to the forward?
Yeah, thanks, Moomba. And yeah, way smarter colleagues than I on this panel can talk about some of the technical aspects. I'd like to focus on sort of the consumer-facing part of it. For those in the military who've ever had to carry things professionally, we say that ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. The same thing can be applied to technology. Is that as technology builds up, we have to make sure that the cognitive burden is reduced for the individual user, or we're not going to use it. So, if Pumbaa can tell you too that if you give him a tool that's too hard to use, it's easier to leave it on the dock than to take it with you into an operation. So, with regards to technology and unmanned systems and proliferation of AI and advanced autonomy algorithms, it's got to be pretty transparent to the user in order to make sure that the task that needs to be accomplished can be accomplished effectively. Or again, simply we're just not going to use it. We don't have the time because time can translate into other things to try to untangle the system. I say it lovingly here at DIU, but we have to be confident that the nerds are going to do nerd things so that we can go forth and accomplish our mission. So we always rely on industry partners and the smart gov folks to make sure that it's being implemented correctly and easily, so that the individual user at the operational level can use the tool. So that's what we focus on at DIU, and I know the DoD, the proliferation is only going up, so we got to get it right.
That's great. I mean, you guys have set the standard for sure. You have the big five, and hopefully there'll be more on the list here soon. Setting that standard is huge, especially to support the DoD. I feel like that standard should maybe be implemented into the different industry pieces, whether it's inspection and everything like that, because the basis of coming out of, a lot of great college kids are getting out and they're getting their 107 and they're out there in the field. And sometimes it does take a little bit more of the operational side to understand what's going on with things like that. But the, you know, technology definitely supports that with the AI. AI is definitely letting you fly by drag and drop versus a stick flying situation. But that brings a perfect situation for Sumedh. How you doing over there? Quiet. Here we go. So jumping into the border. I mean, as far as how do you feel your agency is moving in, and especially, do you feel like any of those standards will implement as far as the DIU? You know, their standardization of having that structure for approval or you know, a go ahead is going to be affected into the CONUS side of things.
Yeah, so, you know, I'll tell you, it's a very different environment from a regulatory perspective when you're talking about CONUS operations. When we first stood up a program back in 2017 here in Homeland Security, we had to really learn from Big Brother DoD just how things work with all our initial systems, the Pumas, the Sky Raiders, the Indigos of the world. And now, as we've learned, you know, just how expensive it is to sustain those kind of systems, we're transitioning with the help of DIU to some of these lower cost commercial off-the-shelf solutions, right? And with that transition, right, we get some of the benefit of AI and for our agents and officers that are using these systems across, you know, CONUS operations. So one of the things that I've found is, one, it's really great to have a system where you can have a greater quantity, but how are you able to alleviate the burden from the agents where you have all these regulations, right? You have to follow Part 107. You have to visually deconflict, you know, with manned aircraft and any other aircraft in the sky. So we're still facing some of these challenges. So what we've done is actually initiate test and evaluation and studies looking at how to achieve beyond visual line of sight operations and bring that as a, you know, as a safety case to the FAA in collaboration with their integration office. So it's you know, not easy by any case, but definitely an effort worthwhile. We definitely have the ability to operate in certain TFRs that allow us to, you know, demonstrate that, hey, this is possible, right, with some of our existing systems. But looking to the future, really, it's about how do we get the most out of the systems that we have, maximize the range, right, these systems provide, get beyond visual line of sight, and get that return on investment that, you know, the government's making in some of these drones.
No, thank you. I mean, you definitely made a great point with this, the safety aspect. That's key with unmanned systems across the board. You know, as you grow into, let's say, cutting into the ice and, you know, walking on eggshells, you want to be very careful because you guys are definitely setting the standard. And that's great that you guys are implementing, you know, whether it's the training, doing the market research for different, you know, COTS, you know, all the stuff off the shelf. And, you know, financially, it's, you know, it's always a huge, I guess, limitation as, you know, systems grow, and all of us being in parts of where unmanned systems and drones are growing. It's almost kind of a gray area across the board. I mean, you know, leading right into Steven and over here in Zoom, I know that they're doing some great things with a couple PD teams and doing stuff like that. So how do you feel you guys are supporting, and where do you see yourself a little bit in the future as far as Zoom?
Yeah, you know, I think for everyone here that's on the line, right, we're talking about something that you're either super excited about or super worried about. So I think that's really the interesting thing. You know, you could imagine if Amazon, if I order some Kleenex from Amazon, they deliver it from his drone, they drop it off, not at my house, but my neighbor's. I might be annoyed, but that's the end. On the other hand, if we're talking about a military ordinance that drops at the wrong address, that's a different type of a payload, and that could have all kinds of issues. So obviously there's a lot of worry that people might have. The good news is people like Shelby and Brian and I'm going to pronounce Sumedh. I'm so sorry about mispronouncing.
You got it right. You're good.
All right, good stuff. So the good news is there are so many processes and procedures in place to make sure that those type B errors don't happen. And we couldn't have a more dedicated group of people really working on that. So that I would say anyone who has that concern issue, I would say that the federal world is probably going to be leap years ahead in terms of the ethics in those types of considerations of anyone else. So I think that's the good news. There was a question about where is this being used today, and I think that's the promise that we all have. Where's AI and drones? How are that coming together? My understanding, the state of Colorado is looking at is using drones in a pilot program in remote areas to understand if there's rock formations over rural roads that could be prone to collapse. And obviously, in that situation, if you can prevent a rock slide over a road, it's much more cost effective than cleaning up after some rocks have closed a roadway. People in California know all about that. Big Sur and other areas have been cut off for months or more. So the promise is already there. In terms of Zoom, there's sort of two efforts of this human-centeredness, because I always like to bring it back to the people, whether it's in the DoD, whether it's CBP. Ultimately, this is information to help human beings make better decisions, more advantageous decisions, and have a decision advantage. So that's the fundamental promise. We do that in two ways. Number one, someone at the tip of the spear, at the front line, needs access to expertise at the flagpole. So that's number one. How can we enable that, and how does command and control help by bringing that expertise that's somewhere else? Is there a building engineer, or is there someone that has schematics of a location that's being looked at that can help someone on the ground? So that would be number one. And number two is, when are those people at the forward, in a forward position, can they bring information back to the decision, the leadership, the operational leadership, to help improve execution elsewhere in theater? We're seeing this here. We didn't expect it. So, based on that real-time relay of information, where I can show you this video so that you can get information. And that's how we're going to see these things being improved. And then in terms of applying them, we're obviously very familiar with what happened in Miami with the building that fell down. So it's a lot easier to bring video to civil engineers who are located elsewhere than to fly a civil engineer to Miami Beach in 2 hours from an incident. So that's bringing expertise to the tip of the spear. Brian's doing God's work there with the wildfires, saving communities. Hats off to you in the FirstNet program. The ability for them to show people further back to say, hey, look, this area is now becoming of concern. We need to evacuate these other people. They're getting these insights and being able to communicate that back. So that's the two-way street. Obviously, Zoom is honored to have its role in all of this, and in terms of facilitating the command and control and that decision advantage. And that's really what we're talking about, is not just having these as abstract capabilities, but as really part of the mission.
No, definitely. I mean, excellent point as far as interoperability between agencies. That's a huge part, whether you're working with the Red Cross or doing anything like that. Those things are growing immensely. Wildfires are huge over in San Diego area. And I've seen personally where, you have helos pick up firemen, and, they, heaven forbid that everybody is ever really on the same Motorola type system. However, that's just the way it works. So bringing in things like whether it's Zoom or a standard of this is what we're going to do from like a DIU type process, so that, Homeland Security and then FirstNet, everybody's on the same page faster and be able to attend to the campaign, with more urgency and stuff like that. So we do have a question that has popped up. Karen, thank you for the question. And the question is going to be, where do you see AI being implemented through drones? So I'm going to throw a trick into there with this. Where do you see it other than your agency is what I'm going to say. So we know that we look around and there's tons of great systems out there. They're supporting, once again, whether it's inspection, whether it's search and rescue, whether it's just, a LiDAR system going out and inspecting underground or any of those things. The next level of AI, where do you see something that's supporting outside of your agency. Let's turn it back around. Let's go to Shelby. How's that? Look at that smile. So let's do it.
Yeah, this is going to be kind of a cop-out, but the answer is everything. For a long time, we've treated unmanned systems as the mission, right? Getting an unmanned system on a target or driving a boat, unmanned boat to location. We're rapidly approaching, and we may already be there, where they are just, again, the tool for the mission. The mission is the data they collect. The mission is the imagery that's represented, or whatever sensor. They're just a truck to get a sensor or to a location or information back to that headquarters. So AI and any sort of advanced processing is going to be critical for all of that, because I don't want to say, hey, I need to put stick forward to get drone to location A. I want to say, robot, get me the information I need. Go do the thing. And that will only be accomplished with, trust in the AI algorithms, and then wide adoption and implementation. So cop-out answer, but the answer is literally everywhere.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, and great answer. As far as autonomy doing its own thing, and the AI supporting, that is huge for the next level of unmanned systems in general, as they grow all over the place. You turn around and it's almost like cars being sold. Sometimes you see all over the place that there's like tons of great systems, which one to choose from. So but that interoperability goes right back to somebody wanting to see versus and touch versus actually hearing about it. I can hand you a card all day long, so right back to you, Stephen, with the to follow on, where do you see AI supporting? I mean, definitely you made the great point earlier about want to see it versus actually just hear about it.
No, absolutely. And in terms of where it is and where it's going, so there's AI is obviously in the background, and I mean, not to plug my own company or anything, but obviously the virtual background behind me, I'm not standing behind, and I don't know that Brian's live on the gorgeous American mountains that are behind him. Obviously, there's a level of AI that's powering something simple like that. Now we're talking to facial recognition to have some level of certainty that I am who I claim to be. That would be another one layer of abstraction. Beyond that, you could say, are there some behavioral analytics that could be run to show, is there some elevated amount of stress on my face that could indicate either a duress or truthfulness or some other factors? Those are types of things that are going to come in. And then with AI, imagine if you have a video you're looking for, we won't go into DoD applications, but let's say you're looking for a lost child amongst a crowd. You want to have some ability to filter out all of the, let's say, the adults, because you're only interested in that one 8-year-old girl. So you want the decision makers to focus only on what's most likely to be important to them. And so the AI is going to continue to improve in those areas in terms of search and rescue and other command and control areas. So for sure, I think that's going to be part and parcel of the equation, and then also getting more information from the video that we're seeing, getting more three-dimensional videos. If I fly over an area, can I then get a 3D map of the area that I've flown over? That also is going to be some AI powering that type of stuff.
Awesome, some great next level with search and rescue, and just supporting a campaign, whether it's a fire or just search and rescue for someone specifically. I mean, that leads right into that mesh network and Brian's operations over here. What's going on? So please, Brian, where do you see AI supporting?
I'll go back to Shelby and say everything to be the easy answer. But when you separate out the command and control versus the payload, it's obvious the payload and the video information or whatever the telemetry information you're getting back, AI is ripe for trying to interpret and analyze that data. But when you look at the C2 links, one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the security of those links, especially as you go beyond visual line of sight and maybe even have autonomous flight. You want to make sure that we protect against intercept, jamming, spoofing, replay attacks, or hijacking the C2 link. We've got identity protection. There's a lot in the security area that AI ML can really have a major impact in making sure that we do protect and the security of the flight operations. So the overall C2 link security, C2 link operations, things like see and avoid or sense and avoid, being able to do collision avoidance and detect obstacles that may be in your way. Again, AI and the use of AI and machine learning, on C2 as well as the payloads, I think, very, very ripe and very bright future for use of AI.
Awesome. Yeah, no, definitely. That's sense and avoid and see and avoid is always key for the unmanned systems, especially like as they're crowding. They're starting to be all over the place. Crop dusters are flying around. You have bulldozers out there, forklifts to, unmanned systems checking, whether it's power lines or a bridge, and they're working in unison. There's not just one out there. There's usually about 10 to 15, 2-man teams, 3-man teams, somebody out there watching them all. I mean, so Sumed, how do you feel about that interoperability within the, an AI supporting, especially with the BVO LOS type stuff, and that long out of sight, out of mind type thing?
Yeah, so we deal with all of this, right? The crop dusters come to mind. Those are the one kind of area where it's like, well, how do I know where they're going to be? We know where the commercial flights are. We know where the helicopters should be, whether they're federal government or they're DoD military. Those crop dusters are kind of the hard to predict factors and being able to get to BV loss operations safely. Now, I'll be a little bit more specific with, where I believe, things are going to go in the federal government. We have a lot of existing technology that's already, in place, right? Video, everything as a camera, especially with, the surveillance type mission that exists in Homeland Security and a lot of different agencies. We need to know, who's coming in the border. We need to know ports of entry. So a lot of infrastructure already exists. Now, how do you implement AI across all these common commercial off-the-shelf solutions that have been put in place to integrate all of it, right? And then bring it to one C2, we're using AI to make sense of it, right? So that's where we're at. We're trying to make sense of massive amounts of data. So part of it is, hey, we have predators in the sky. We have drones up in the sky, right? So integration between those two components. We have Blackhawks, integration there. We have land-based systems, mobile systems. All these different systems, right, are operating independently. Their video streams have some integration. The metadata has some integration, but by and large, there's a lot of integration that's missing. Bringing it all down to one feed, where we can leverage AI and software to make command decisions, right, based on the operators on the ground, leverage team awareness kit, right, using the phones that the agents have in their hands, get all that information to the operators and the decision makers, and implement AI where it needs to be implemented. That's really where we're going in the future.
I mean, going to the future and AI supporting, the key word I think about is success. Successful, I mean, you have integration, interoperability, but scalability also, being able to grow with working together and doing all that. So I 100% agree with all of you. And I would say everything also, and it's just properly adjusting each set of industry to make sure that they're being successful, safe, and keeping a standard to make sure that, everyone's moving to the next level of innovation. So I feel that, that leads right into the other question that I would have was training. Do you feel that training in the future will be something that's more specific, to a system, to an industry, or, is it to a purpose of an operation, because there are so many systems out there nowadays, and being interoperable. I mean, the 107, we talk about the 107 and that FAA licenses, but that's not really the next level. Each system has its specifics. So we're moving with the AI and supporting. So the question is, going back to it, it would be, do you think because of the movement in AI and technology advancing, do you think training will change within the US, I guess, with industry changes? So to support industry. Brian, let's start off with you this time.
Yeah, I definitely think that training is going to change and adapt, to the different environments where drones will be used. Certainly, you'll have the basics, right, which I'll call the basic ground school or the FAA 107 license, but then you have to build on top of that. And I would call it more specialties, right, for areas. If you're doing infrastructure inspection, that may require one training path. If you're doing, commercial service restoration with tethered drones, that might be another training path. And also the type of drones, or the type of deployables that you're going to be using may also require some specialized training in that area as well. And I think, as we bring AI in and the more intelligence that goes into the drones, it doesn't take away from the operator. You still have to have a human operator that has the knowledge, has the capability, and is aware of the regulations surrounding that.
Yeah, the regulations are growing for sure. And then the training, I think that I agree with you 100%. It's going to grow and change. Specifically, in your area also, as far as first, search and rescue or supporting, and as they expand into military or DoD, federal, and everybody working together, so that's great. Stephen, what do you think? Do you think
the
that
training
like
changing just as rapidly as everything else? And so there's a few things. I think first of all, AI is going to let us train in more and more realistic ways off system. So that's going to be part of it, and being able to do that training in a way where I'm not physically located, near the device, or I can be adjudicated or coached by someone who might not necessarily be near me. So that's going to be part of that. But I think in terms of the training, what we're going to see is an evolution in the control of these systems. If we think about, just where we are with motor vehicles, now they're introducing cars that don't even have a full circular steering wheel. So obviously, if you think about it, that means the intent is you will not be using it as much to parallel park or other scenarios where you're really turning that wheel, right? So the systems themselves, Puma, you talked about it earlier, to sort of drag and drop as opposed to flying by stick. So there's going to be a wholesale evolution in the training itself, how it takes place, where it takes place, and the amount of simulation versus real world. So all of that really coming together in a lot of different ways.
Simulation is key. Simulation is key. One of the things that we say as a WTI, I go, hey, we already know how to fly the aircraft. It's the command and control and talking, and now you're in charge of 5 other aircraft out there. How do we make sure that they know what's going on by just words alone? And cameras help nowadays. So Med, what do you think? I mean, with the long range situation, sometimes the payload is going to be key in delivering, and how that training is going to be affected by AI. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to speak to the baseline, right? We train in policy part 107 and then the ground school, right? In terms of the operation, depending on the drone, right? It varies, right? You could have a fixed wing drone, a tethered drone, a VTOL. Things change based on that. But then really where I see things going is as AI and policy, right, the regulations ease up, or technology and AI are able to, basically implement some change, right? Because we can say, look, we're able to operate more safely in the CONUS environment. That will then drive the actual change in how we do training. Right. So really, it has to be that regulatory and technology piece that changes first. And then we can say, look, great, we're able to accommodate that with the training side. And potentially, the policy is never really going to change. You always have to train your folks on that. But then what we train them on, it will change. And how we adapt the training in a way where it's not a manual, it's your driver license is going to change, right? If Teslas take over the world. So you might not have to do as much training on the actual, hey, follow this road sign and follow that road sign. It'll be more of the, okay, well, this is how you, operate your autonomous drone and just understand the rules of the road. So that's really where I see it going. It's really just how fast can we get there, right? For our mission, for sure, the sooner the better. We just have to be able to do it in a safe way, so that one incident in your fleet gets grounded. So we definitely want to avoid that.
License, you make me think about my kids are old, they're gone, they live out of the house, and I'm worried about my grandkids. So definitely the training is always key for making sure that they're going to be successful and keeping everybody safe. So that's everything. That's why we have licenses, and like you said, and it's just going to stretch into air, ground, and doing everything like that. Shelby, what do you think? I know DIU has amazing processes and a great standard. They set the bar for sure. They want to make sure that everybody's implementing everything possible to keep it safe and keep it moving forward, which is the key also, there. So how do you feel that training will be affected by all that?
Yeah, so specifically something we've been working on recently is removing various barriers to access for drones. The whole point, not just drones, but unmanned surface vehicles, UUVs as well. We've got to get to a point where we are creating a more permissive environment. Too often we do deconfliction, not true integration, and training is going to be a key part of that. But not my perspective, and sort of what we look at is not training on the drone. We have to take at face value that the drone is going to do drone things when asked, but training on how to integrate the drone into the scheme of maneuver, integrate into the national airspace, focus on the mission, again, the task that we're asking the drone to do. If we're still, single pair of eyes, single drone, heads down at all times, trying to make sure that the suggestions we've given the drone are being executed faithfully, then we're not really enhancing our capability. We, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, I'm an active duty Marine. Commandant of the Marine Corps recently said that we have to treat our robots as, trusted members of our unit. So we have to build trust in the robot, build trust in its capability. That way, when we task it to do something, we're not micromanaging the drone, and then training will tailor and be adjusted to meet that. We can also look at the injection of unmanned systems and AI into our training. You mentioned earlier the live virtual constructed training paradigm. Training is expensive, but that's how you get good at the job. So if we can virtually simulate the training, if we can do constructed training with unmanned systems, representative unmanned systems, and then build up to that live training event, we're only going to become more efficient at our jobs, and we will have more reps and sets facilitated by the injection of those unmanned systems and those AI algorithms to just get better at what we're doing. So I see it in two ways. One, we have to become comfortable with the presence of robots in our space, and then the training will be focused more on what that robot's accomplishing versus the actual manipulation of that robot.
Yeah, I mean, definitely with knowledge comes power, right? So as far as everybody understanding systems and how things are being implemented, whether it's into the OCONUS side or the CONUS side, into our world every day now, guaranteed you hear or see something about a drone out there almost daily, and it's not just about dropping a bomb or privacy issues. It's more about how they're supporting our just world, I guess, as far as everything. And once again, I definitely wanted to say thank you for all the input that you guys are here for in the time. It's great if you guys know anybody, or if anybody on that's listening in would like to volunteer. It's great. We would love to do find out how drones are affecting your world, how unmanned systems are moving, and helping hopefully or how they're doing different things, and how whether it's financially or whether it's for a safety issue, and sending divers down or doing anything like that is the next level of unmanned systems. And it's just keeping everybody. One of the things that we talk about with a couple of my unmanned system friends is we talk about Space Force. So Space Force will eventually not be us flying in an X-wing fighter. It'll probably be us controlling unmanned systems, instead of putting 10 people out there in a flight or different aircraft. It's us controlling unmanned systems. And I'll be honest, the way the kids are growing up nowadays, they know more about iPhones and tech sometimes, and I work in this industry. So it's great to see, and the knowledge base comes at a higher level. I mean, we had to all, establish that gray area and make sure that programs were set up. So, but yeah, I guess, Kirsten, how are we doing on time?
We are just about out of time. Was there any final closing statements you guys wanted to add before we close out?
I'm going to bring one last question up with a phrase. All you get is a phrase. No more than 10 words. Mine is going to be, for us, the goal is to learn to scale innovation together. I want everybody to learn unmanned systems, not just hear about them, but learn about them, whether it's STEM technology and do all that stuff. So, and that's a little bit more than 10 words, but the phrase has got to be 10 words if that works. So, all right. Sumedh, let's start off. Let's go.
I don't know about 10 words. That's tough. Here we're used to talking a lot, but kind of final words. I'm excited about the future of the capabilities that we'll be bringing in, partnerships across the interagency, with our partners here in DIU, with the FBI and DOI. There's so many different groups that are leading change and innovation with in the SUAS world, as well as the UAS and some of the ground vehicles. I'm really excited for the future, and I think if we have great collaboration like we have today, we'll have a bright future.
Awesome. Stephen.
Yeah, well, for me, the future is allowing human beings to improve our ability to make decisions, to get information, data, content, contextualization, and the collaboration with other people that we need to make better decisions as people. The future is about people. The past is about people. The future is going to be about people, and machines are going to help people. It's not Skynet here, but it's going to be all about helping people make better decisions.
Awesome. Excellent. Brian.
Yeah, well, I'll echo your innovation. I think we've just touched the surface of where the whole drones, UAV, unmanned vehicles are going. I think the future is, very bright for this technology. Once we get to beyond visual line of sight, more autonomy, more AI, ML, and using augmented and virtual reality for some of the training, the sky's the limit on where this is going to go in the future.
Awesome, thank you. And Shelby.
Yeah, Puma, I'm going to close it out focusing on sort of servant leadership, right? Those of us with access and the ability need to identify and solve the complex challenges because the end users cannot. So in order to make sure we get the true enabled permissive environment, we have to get after those problems.
Awesome. And you were really close to the 10 words too, by the way. We do talk a lot, innovation is limitless. We can talk about, we had a couple of calls and we can talk about this forever. But I definitely like to focus on STEM and the next level of where our future is not just with us and the technology out there. It's the technology that's implemented, when you're younger, and as they grow, they will be doing, the kids around us are going to be flying unmanned systems and landing on carriers, and they're all going to be sitting in their living room or something like that with virtual, octo goggles or whatever it is. But that is definitely the future. So please, and once again, if anybody would like to volunteer from the panel, once again, or anybody that's listening in, feel free. We have unmanned papers coming out from ATARC and everything, also white papers. And this is limitless, all the information that we can get to put out to the world to let them know that it's not just dropping a bomb or privacy issues and, just video. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope that you have a great day. And I appreciate your time once again. Amazing knowledge. And it's great to have you guys across the board because this is the key for the next level of the innovation and, scaling together. So, all right. Great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I want to just thank again our partners at Cloudera and Dinodo for sponsoring today's event and you all for joining us. So we will see you at the next one for building cyber resilience with zero trust data management principles. You can go register today and talk to you guys soon. Hope everyone has a great week.